In the vast galaxy of Star Wars, few stories are as unbelievable as that of Darth Revan, a Jedi Knight who led an army into war, only to fall to the dark side. A Sith Lord who conquered worlds, only to lose everything. A man who returned to the Jedi, battled his former apprentice, and confronted the Emperor of the Sith himself. Tonight, we'll follow Revan's entire path, from Jedi hero to Darth Revan the Conqueror, to forgotten prisoner, and finally, to legend. This is the complete story of one of the most extraordinary figures in Star Wars history. And as you drift off, you'll discover every twist, betrayal, and secret that made Revan unforgettable. Before there was the Darth, before there was the Conqueror, before there was the Savior or the Betrayer, there was only a gifted child drawn into the Order of the Jedi. The Jedi Order, keepers of balance, guardians of the fragile peace that had held the Republic together for thousands of years. On distant worlds, temples and enclaves rang with the teachings of the Force, shaping young minds into patient servants of light. It was in such an enclave, on the green and whispering plains of Dantooine, that the figure we would know as Revan first walked the path. The Dantooine Academy, set among rolling hills and quiet rivers, appeared almost timeless, a place that the galaxy's wars seemed to forget. Stone walls, weathered and ancient, embraced chambers where masters lectured in tones soft as the wind, and where Padawans sparred under the pale skies. It was here that Revan learned, listening with a curiosity that never ceased, asking questions where others might remain silent, pushing at the boundaries of doctrine with a mind too restless to remain still. Among the masters was one whose voice lingered with particular weight, Kreia. She was a philosopher, a seer, a woman who saw beneath the surface of light and dark, and her teachings were often met with unease by the council. But in Revan she saw a student who could pierce veils others would never even notice. For a time, Kreia guided Revan, planting seeds of doubt and seeds of possibility, though later she would be cast out and her role questioned by history. Still, in the hush of that temple, one can imagine the young Revan listening to her words, absorbing her lessons, and shaping them into a philosophy that would later shake the galaxy. Beside Revan was another student, one who would become both brother and rival, companion and executioner, Alec. Taller, more straightforward, Alec admired Revan deeply, calling him leader long before either bore such titles. In time, Alec would be known as Malak, but in those early days he was simply a loyal Padawan who saw in Revan a spark destined to rise. The galaxy itself was restless then. From the edge of known space came whispers of a people who lived for war, who breathed it like air, who wore their armor as second skin. The Mandalorians. They had long been a warrior culture, raiding and testing their strength against the Republic in ancient times. But now, under a new Mandalore, they began to stir once more. At first it was raiding, piracy, small clashes on forgotten systems. That like sparks leaping from a fire, those raids grew into flames, and soon whole sectors trembled as Mandalorian fleets crossed their borders. The Jedi Council watched, and counseled patience. For the Jedi, rushing into war was not their way. They believed the Force would guide them, that inaction could sometimes be the highest form of wisdom. But for Revan, young though he was, the thought of standing still as innocence burned was unbearable. He argued, he pushed, he debated in the great council chambers, standing before masters whose patience had been forged across centuries, and declared that the Jedi had a duty to act. The council resisted. The wars of the galaxy had burned the Jedi before, and they feared repeating those mistakes. They remembered the Sith Wars, the Exarchan crisis, the losses of generations past. And so they counseled restraint, but restraint to Revan looked like neglect, and that conviction became the beginning of a fracture. Revan began to gather others. First Alec, then others, students who believed as he did, that compassion demanded action. They called themselves Revanchists, taking their name from the young Jedi whose voice guided them. It was a movement, not yet a rebellion, but already it pressed against the Council's will. And then came Cathar, a world of seas and golden plains, home to a gentle feline people now scarred by the cruelty of Mandalorian conquest. Years earlier, a massacre had taken place upon its shores when Mandalorians drove the Cathar into the waters and slaughtered them without mercy. The echoes of that atrocity lingered in the soil, in the tides, in the Force itself. And it was upon that shore that Revan stood. The wind carried the voices of the slain, the sea shimmered with the weight of unquiet memory. And there, half buried in sand and grief, Revan discovered the mask of the Mandalorian who had led the slaughter. He lifted it, and the cries of the dead seemed to fill the air. The mask became a vow. To fight the Mandalorians, to end their terror, to ensure that Cathar would never be repeated. From that moment Revan wore the mask, not as a trophy but as a covenant. It became his face, his symbol, his defiance against the Mandalorian threat. The Council, even then, remained silent. But Revan's choice had already been made. The Revanchists grew in number, and the line between Jedi obedience and Jedi defiance grew thin. On Cathar's shores, with the mask upon his brow, Revan's path diverged from the one the Council had laid before him. The war was not yet at its height, but the storm had begun to gather, and when the Mandalorians pressed deeper into Republic space, burning worlds and breaking fleets, it would be Revan who rose to meet them. Yet even in those early steps, something deeper stirred. For the Force does not move without purpose, and the vow taken on Cathar's sand would ripple outward, shaping destinies not only of one war, but of wars yet to come. The mask was donned, and once donned, it would change everything. For when the mask comes off, everything changes, but before it can be taken away, it must first be worn through fire. And that fire would be the crucible of the Mandalorian Wars. In the vast galaxy of Star Wars, few stories are as unbelievable as that of Darth Revan, a Jedi Knight who led an army into war, only to fall to the dark side. A Sith Lord who conquered worlds, only to lose everything, even his own memory. A man who returned to the Jedi, battled his former apprentice, and confronted the Emperor of the Sith himself. Tonight we'll follow Revan's entire path, from Jedi hero to Darth Revan the Conqueror, to forgotten prisoner, and finally to legend. This is the complete story of one of the most extraordinary figures in Star Wars history. And as you drift off, you'll discover every twist, date, and secret that made Revan unforgettable. Before there was the Darth, before there was the Conqueror, before there was the Savior or the Betrayer, there was only a gifted child drawn into the Order of the Jedi. The Jedi Order, keepers of balance, guardians of the fragile peace that had held the Republic together for thousands of years. On distant worlds, temples and enclaves rang with the teachings of the Force, shaping young minds into patient servants of light. It was in such an enclave, on the green and whispering plains of Dantooine, that the figure we would know as Revan first walked the path. The Dantooine Academy, set among rolling hills and quiet rivers, appeared almost timeless, a place that the galaxy's wars seemed to forget. Stone walls, weathered and ancient, embraced chambers where masters lectured in tones soft as the wind, and where Padawans sparred under the pale skies. It was here that Revan learned, listening with a curiosity that never ceased, asking questions where others might remain silent, pushing at the boundaries of doctrine with a mind too restless to remain still. Among the masters was one whose voice lingered with particular weight, Kreia. She was a philosopher, a seer, a woman who saw beneath the surface of light and dark, and her teachings were often met with unease by the Council. But in Revan, she saw a student who could pierce veils others would never even notice. For a time, Kreia guided Revan, planting seeds of doubt and seeds of possibility, though later she would be cast out and her role questioned by history. Still, in the hush of that temple, one can imagine the young Revan listening to her words, absorbing her lessons, and shaping them into a philosophy that would later shake the galaxy. Beside Revan was another student, one who would become both brother and rival, companion and executioner, Alec. Taller, more straightforward, Alec admired Revan deeply, calling him leader long before either bore such titles. In time, Alec would be known as Malak, but in those early days he was simply a loyal Padawan who saw in Revan a spark destined to rise. The galaxy itself was restless then. From the edge of known space came whispers of a people who lived for war, who breathed it like air, who wore their armor as second skin. The Mandalorians, they had long been a warrior culture, raiding and testing their strength against the Republic in ancient times. But now, under a new Mandalore, they began to stir once more. At first it was raiding, piracy, small clashes on forgotten systems. But like sparks leaping from a fire, those raids grew into flames, and soon whole sectors trembled as Mandalorian fleets crossed their borders. The Jedi Council watched and counseled patience. For the Jedi, rushing into war was not their way. They believed the Force would guide them, that inaction could sometimes be the highest form of wisdom taught. For Revan, young though he was, the thought of standing still as innocence burned was unbearable. He argued, he pushed, he debated in the great council chambers, standing before masters whose patience had been forged across centuries, and declared that the Jedi had a duty to act. The council resisted. The wars of the galaxy had burned the Jedi before, and they feared repeating those mistakes. They remembered the Sith Wars, the Exar Kun crisis, the losses of generations past. And so they counseled restraint to Revan looked like neglect. And that conviction became the beginning of a fracture. Revan began to gather others. First Alec, then others, students who believed as he did, that compassion demanded action. They called themselves revanchists, taking their name from the young Jedi, whose voice guided them. It was a movement, not yet a rebellion, but already it pressed against the Council's will. And then came Cathar, a world of seas and golden plains, home to a gentle feline people now scarred by the cruelty of Mandalorian conquest. Years earlier, a massacre had taken place upon its shores when Mandalorians drove the Cathar into the waters and slaughtered them without mercy. The echoes of that atrocity lingered in the soil, in the tides, in the Force itself, and it was upon that shore that Revan stood. The wind carried the voices of the slain, the sea shimmered with the weight of unquiet memory. And there, half buried in sand and grief, Revan discovered the mask of the Mandalorian who had led the slaughter. He lifted it, and the cries of the dead seemed to fill the air. The mask became a vow, to fight the Mandalorians, to end their terror, to ensure that Cathar would never be repeated. From that moment, Revan wore the mask, not as a trophy but as a covenant. It became his face, his symbol, his defiance against the Mandalorian threat. The Council, even then, remained silent. But Revan's choice had already been made. The revanchists grew in number, and the line between Jedi obedience and Jedi defiance grew thin. On Cathar's shores, with the mask upon his brow, Revan's path diverged from the one the Council had laid before him. The war was not yet at its height, but the storm had begun to gather. And when the Mandalorians pressed deeper into Republic space, burning worlds and breaking fleets, it would be Revan who rose to meet them. Yet even in those early steps, something deeper stirred. For the Force does not move without purpose, and the vow taken on Cathar's sand would ripple outward, shaping destinies not only of one war but of wars yet to come. The mask was donned, and once donned, it would change everything. For when the mask comes off, everything changes. But before it can be taken away, it must first be worn through fire. And that fire would be the crucible of the Mandalorian Wars. War begins not with thunder, but with murmurs. Whispers carried from the outer rim, reports of raids, distress signals that flicker and vanish. At first the Republic dismisses them as isolated, as exaggerated, as nothing to alarm the Senate or the Jedi. But those who listen closely, those who read the pattern behind the noise, feel the tremor before the quake. Revan is one of those listeners. The Mandalorians, once defeated and humbled in wars past, have returned in force. They do not fight for credits. They do not fight for land. They fight because it is their creed. Their armor, Beskar forged and scarred from countless battles, is both shield and scripture. Every victory is a verse. every conquest a hymn to war itself. And at their head stands Mandalore, the ultimate. He is not a tyrant drunk on power, but a warrior utterly convinced that only battle purifies the spirit. Under his command, the clans gather, fleets rise, worlds burn. When the Jedi Council hears these reports, their chambers echo with debate. Masters raise their voices with caution. They say the Mandalorians are testing, probing, but not yet threatening the Republic's core. They argue that if the Jedi intervene too soon, they risk inflaming a conflict that might yet be contained. But to Revan, these are excuses. The Republic is bleeding, and to do nothing is to watch it die. Revan speaks with fire. He walks the halls of Dantooine, of Coruscant, pressing his case, gathering not only Jedi but senators, officers, citizens who believe in defense rather than hesitation. He is charismatic, persuasive, drawing others as though the Force itself amplifies his voice. And those who join him take on a name. They call themselves the Revanchists. The name is more than a banner. It is a declaration that they will act where the Council has chosen stillness, that they will fight to shield the Republic from annihilation, and that Revan is their leader. Among them is Alec. Still young, still idealistic, Alec follows his friend without hesitation. He trusts Revan's mind, trusts his instincts, trusts that together they can shape the war to come. Later, Alec will be known as Malak, but here, in these first steps, he is simply a loyal friend who believes utterly in Revan's vision. Others, too, gather. Mitra Surik, quiet and perceptive, with an empathy that will one day both save and condemn her. Jar, Durak, young knights, and even Padawans who would rather break with tradition than stand by as the helpless perish. The movement spreads, whispered from temple to temple, cloaked in secrecy, carried on by restless voices that no longer accept inaction. The Council frowns, but for every word of caution they speak, another Jedi slips away to join the Revanchists. The Order begins to fracture, not in open schism, but in a widening crack that will soon become unbridgeable. For the first time in centuries, Jedi are not united, and unity once lost is not easily recovered. Beyond the Republic's borders, the Mandalorians strike with increasing ferocity. They bombard agricultural worlds, leaving fields of ash. They storm colonies, dragging populations into chains. Their fleets are swift, their warriors merciless, their commanders calculating. One of these commanders, Cassis Fett, orchestrates attacks with precision, so brutal that whole star systems are left silent in his wake. He is not Mandalore, but he is the hand that shapes strategy, the mind that turns savagery into method. For Revan, every new atrocity is proof that the Jedi cannot wait, proof that patience is cowardice in the face of such slaughter. And so, on the edges of battlefields, in the wreckage of cities, he begins to lead. At first, small skirmishes, Jedi cells guiding Republic units, pushing back raiders, turning retreats into stands. But soon, his command expands. Revan becomes more than a symbol. He becomes a general. It is not without cost. The Council denounces him, refusing to recognize his authority. Whispers accuse him of pride, of arrogance, of dragging the Jedi into a war they cannot control. But soldiers rally around him, admirals seek his counsel, and in time, even those who once doubted begin to see that without him, the Republic will crumble. In the dim glow of starship bridges, holocharts illuminate his eyes. He studies not only where the Mandalorians strike, but why. He learns their patterns, their weaknesses, their hunger for honor, and he begins to use it against them. Ambushes turn their pride into traps. Feints draw them into overextension. His mind becomes a weapon sharper than any blade. Yet for all his brilliance, Revan is still learning. The Mandalorians are not easily defeated. They fight with a fury that burns like fire, and for every victory he wins, there are losses that weigh heavy upon his soul. But in those losses, Revan hardened. His compassion remains, but it is now tempered by the steel of necessity. And those who follow him begin to see that their leader is changing. Among the revanchists, a saying begins to circulate: where Revan leads, victory follows. It is not always true, but it is true often enough to make men believe. Still, shadows linger. In the night hours, when the stars outside the viewport shimmer in silence, Revan's gaze drifts into the unknown. He wonders what drives Mandalore to such conquest. He wonders why the clans fight with such unity, such purpose, when before they had been fractured and feuding. And in the quiet of the Force, he senses something deeper, as though another hand, unseen, moves the pieces of this war. For now, he cannot know. For now, he must fight the battle before him. But already, destiny waits in the wings. The revanchist has risen. The Mandalorian Wars have begun in earnest, and the first test of Revan's mercy will not come in victory, but in loss. War does not arrive with clarity. It arrives in fire, in smoke, in the screams of those who cannot flee. For Revan, the early campaigns are lessons etched in blood and steel, lessons that the Jedi Council could never have taught. The first true battle comes at Ares III, a world of rolling deserts and scattered cities, a place the Republic had deemed quiet, untroubled. But the Mandalorians strike with precision, as though they had studied the galaxy's calm and found its softest spot. The Republic fleet is unprepared. The cities fall, and Revan, commanding a small task force of Jedi-led starships, realizes that victory will not be given, it must be seized at cost. Ares III becomes a crucible. Young soldiers die in corridors of smoke and fire. Civilians huddle beneath rubble, whispering prayers into dust. The Mandalorians fight not for glory but because they were bred to conquer. Revan watches. He notes patterns, strategies, weaknesses, and the cruel logic of war. Yet, adaptation does not erase grief. Every loss, every failed maneuver, every soldier swept away into nothingness, presses into Revan's mind. Even Malak, fighting at his side, sees the change. Revan's compassion begins to harden. He will not stop being merciful, but he learns that mercy alone does not protect the innocent. The Mandalorians push further, expanding their raids into the Rim. Seruko, a lush world of rivers and plains, becomes their next target. They descend with a precision that is terrifying. Orbital bombardments reduce villages to smoldering ash. Republic soldiers fight, but they are spread thin, their communications severed, their morale frayed. And Revan arrives only to find the battlefield already drenched in ruin. He does not despair. Instead, he studies the battlefield, noting the movements of Mandalorian squads, their tendency to overextend, their reliance on strict codes of honor. He begins to weave strategies not only to counter them, but to anticipate them, to turn their strengths into vulnerabilities. Revan's mind becomes a map, tracing every route, every choke point, every possible engagement. Every setback becomes a lesson. Yet these victories are never clean. For every Mandalorian slain, a civilian dies. For every base captured, a colony burns. Revan feels it all, not only as a commander but as a student of the Force. The Force whispers not only guidance but sorrow. He senses that war is not a simple calculation. It is a tide, sometimes crueler than the enemies themselves. Despite the losses, Revan earns renown. Soldiers whisper his name as they fight, and the Mandalorians begin to recognize the threat of the young Jedi who moves like a shadow among their forces. He begins to shape his own army, training companions in tactics as well as the Force. Among them, Malak becomes more than a partner. He becomes a reflection, a reminder of loyalty amidst chaos. Mitra Surik observes silently, offering counsel and warning where Revan might overreach. Together, the trio becomes the nucleus of a campaign that will one day be legendary. Revan also learns the deeper nature of the Mandalorian threat. It is not mere conquest they seek. It is the shaping of the galaxy, according to their vision, a vision where only the strong survive. Their culture, their ethos, every raid and every siege is a reflection of that vision. And in seeing it, Revan realizes that to defeat them, he must not only fight battles but understand the hearts that wage them. The Jedi Council, watching from afar, grows uneasy. Revan's successes attract attention, but his methods, at times ruthless, sow concern. They whisper that he is straying too far from the tenets of the Order. Yet Revan's vision is clear to him, sharper than any decree or doctrine. The Mandalorians will fall, but only if he moves with both compassion and cruelty, as the situation demands. On the fringes of the galaxy, news of his campaign spreads. Systems that had feared annihilation now speak of a Jedi who challenges fate itself. His victories, small though they are, kindle hope. But hope is a fragile thing, and in the shadows danger waits. For the Mandalorians, even in defeat, are relentless. They learn, they adapt, and they will not forgive. Revan understands this. Every mission, every skirmish, every encounter is a step on a path that is both necessary and perilous. And as his campaign stretches across star systems, as he directs fleets and leads warriors into the fray, he begins to sense something deeper, a pattern behind the Mandalorian resurgence, a whisper of manipulation that hints at forces beyond mere warlords. Yet for now, there is only the battlefield. The cries of the dying, the roar of engines, the flash of blaster fire. These are his companions, his lessons, his reminders that even the most brilliant plan carries risk. And he moves forward, learning from each encounter, sharpening his mind, his instincts, his will. Even in victory, Revan feels the weight of every life lost. Every civilian burned, every soldier felled, is a mark upon his soul, a reminder that even righteous action carries shadow. And it is this shadow, not yet fully understood, that will follow him through the campaigns to come. From these early defeats, a new strategy is born. Not one of mere defense, not one of reactive force, but of audacious, calculated maneuvers that will eventually turn the tide of war. The Mandalorians are skilled, their numbers vast, their determination unyielding. But Revan is sharper, faster, and above all he learns. The losses of Eras III, the devastation of Sirocco, these are the crucible fires that shape him. And in these fires, Malak, Mitra, and the other companions witness a transformation. The young Jedi, who once questioned every rule, now carries a certainty tempered with caution. The revanchists follow him, not blindly, but with the understanding that their leader sees more than they can, and that his mind moves across the battlefield like a blade through shadow. It is here, amid the chaos and ruin, that Revan begins to become more than a Jedi. He begins to become a tactician, a philosopher of war, a figure whose decisions will echo far beyond the battlefield. And though the Mandalorians are yet undefeated, the first cracks appear in their armor, the first vulnerabilities exposed. Every trap Revan sets, every feint and strike, begins to shift the balance. And yet, even in these early victories, a warning looms. The Mandalorian threat is only the first wave. Something older, darker, waits beyond the immediate war, watching, shaping, whispering. Revan cannot yet name it, but he feels its presence in the Force, a tremor beneath the tumult of battle. For every triumph, for every step forward, there is the shadow of greater challenges. And in these moments of reflection, Revan realizes that strategy alone will not suffice. The galaxy is not only a map to be conquered, it is a living, breathing entity filled with currents and tides that no mind can fully predict. And the Mandalorians are merely the beginning. As the dust settles over Sirocco and Eras III, Revan's gaze turns outward. He studies the stars, the Force, the subtle motions of fleet and foe alike. He understands with a clarity born of sacrifice and observation that the war ahead will test not only his strength but his wisdom, his judgment, and his heart. The first lessons have been learned. The blade has been blooded, and from ash and ruin, a different kind of strategy is born. Victory is rarely immediate. It creeps forward, measured in inches, in small shifts of momentum that only those paying close attention can perceive. For Revan, Those moments are precious. Every skirmish, every engagement with Mandalorian forces reveals lessons, shows opportunities, and exposes weaknesses that must be exploited. The galaxy watches, even if it does not realize it, as a new hand moves across the board, nudging the pieces with a certainty that borders on inevitability. The early defeats of Ares III and Serroco are now behind him, yet their memory lingers like smoke in the air, reminding him that even brilliance cannot erase the cost of war. Revan studies the Mandalorians as a predator studies its prey, tracing every movement, every tactical choice, every predictable error. He learns the rhythm of their assaults, the cadence of their commands, and the pride that binds their warriors together. And from these observations he begins to craft strategies not just of defense, but of orchestration plans that turn Mandalorian certainty into vulnerability. The first major shift comes at Diakon's Sun, a jungle moon of Onderon, where the Mandalorians had established a staging ground. Revan gathers his fleet, a combination of Jedi-led units and Republic forces, quietly assembling a force that is underestimated by the enemy. The forests of Diakon's Sun are dense, tangled, and dripping with perpetual twilight, perfect for concealment, perfect for ambush. Revan understands the terrain better than any Mandalorian scout could. He positions his forces to take advantage of every hill, every river, every shadowed glade. The battle begins with deception. Mandalorian strike teams land on the surface expecting minimal resistance, only to find themselves funneled into narrow passes, cut off by hidden Jedi warriors. Blaster fire echoes through the trees, and the Mandalorians realize too late that they are not merely facing defenders, they are stepping into the teeth of a mine that anticipates their every move. Ships orbiting above cut-off escape routes, forcing the invaders into choke points where every advance is met with precision strikes. In the thick of battle, Revan walks among his forces, his presence both inspiring and unnerving. His lightsaber, when drawn, is a beacon and a blade. Not every strike kills, but each swing redirects the flow of engagement, turning chaos into control. He moves with the Force as an extension of thought, anticipating each step of the Mandalorian advance before it is even made. Malak fights at his side, a constant and grounding presence, his loyalty unwavering. Together they coordinate maneuvers that confuse the enemy, forcing the Mandalorian units to fracture their formations, abandoning the cohesion that is their strength. Mitra Surik, calm and precise, guides reserves through the jungle, reinforcing positions where needed, ensuring that every advantage Revan creates is fully exploited. The Mandalorians, despite their skill and ferocity, begin to falter. Their confidence erodes, replaced by confusion and frustration. And when Mandalore the Ultimate himself descends onto the battlefield, he finds a force not merely matching his own, but anticipating him, outmaneuvering him at every turn. It is here that the tide begins to turn. The victory at Desuan is not total. Many Mandalorians escape into the jungle, regrouping to fight another day. Yet the lesson is clear. Revan is not simply reacting to war. He is shaping it. And with this first decisive success, his reputation spreads like wildfire across the Republic. Soldiers whisper of the Jedi General whose tactics seem almost supernatural, whose strategies bend the outcome of entire campaigns. The Council watches uneasily. They see Revan's victories, yet they sense the growing distance between him and their teachings. He is still a Jedi, still guided by the Force, but his methods are unorthodox, at times ruthless, and increasingly decisive. Some masters warn that such power, such independence carries danger not only to the individual but to the Order itself. But for now, Revan's victories hold the Republic together when otherwise it might have fractured. From Desuan, Revan presses onward. He turns his attention to Malachor V, a planet scarred by previous wars, where Mandalorian forces have regrouped and fortified. The journey there is long, crossing star systems scarred by smaller raids, planets where the population trembles under Mandalorian occupation. Yet Revan moves swiftly, each decision calculated, each strike precise, each maneuver a step toward greater control of the conflict. The battles along this path test his leadership in every conceivable way. He must inspire troops who are weary, reassure civilians who fear for their lives, and maintain coordination across fleets, separated by vast distances. Each skirmish brings casualties, and each casualty carries weight, pressing into Revan's conscience. Yet he does not falter. He knows that the alternative, inaction, is far more devastating. By the time Revan's forces reach Malachor, the Mandalorians are already aware of his approach. They brace for his attack, setting traps, fortifying positions, attempting to turn their last stronghold into an insurmountable challenge. But Revan has already anticipated their moves. Every trap is neutralized, every ambush countered, and every fortified position undermined by the precise orchestration of his troops. The battle is long, brutal, and unforgiving. Blaster fire cuts through the air, lightsabers flash in the shadow of ruined cities, and the Force itself seems to bend around Revan, lending him clarity and foresight. The Mandalorian forces fight with courage and tenacity, but gradually their cohesion fractures. Revan moves like water around rocks, flowing through the battlefield, shaping outcomes without apparent effort, yet with absolute control. At the climax of the campaign, Mandalore himself confronts Revan. Two leaders, two warriors, each shaped by the demands of war, each understanding that the outcome here will influence the galaxy for decades. They clash not only physically but philosophically, a battle of minds as much as of blades. Revan's strategy is unyielding, his patience unwavering, and slowly, inexorably, the Mandalorian lines begin to collapse. When the dust settles, the Mandalorians are broken, forced to retreat, and their dreams of conquest are scattered across the stars. The Republic, battered but alive, breathes for the first time in months without fear of annihilation. Revan, standing amidst the aftermath, feels the weight of every decision, every life lost, every victory earned. He is changed. The war has begun to shape him as much as he shapes it. Yet even in triumph, shadows linger. For the Mandalorians are not the true architects of destiny, only the first obstacle in a galaxy where deeper forces wait. Revan, despite his victories, senses that the coming trials will demand more than strategy, more than courage, more than loyalty. They will demand a reckoning with the very nature of power, of the Force, and of himself. The tide has turned, but the ocean remains vast and uncharted. Revan, the Revanchist, the Jedi General, stands on the edge of this new horizon, knowing that even greater storms await. And as the stars shimmer in the silent night above Malachor, the galaxy itself seems to hold its breath. For the next battle is not yet fought, and the true test of Revan's resolve is still to come. The Mandalorian crusade deepens. The galaxy, once quiet in its vast corners, now trembles with the echo of relentless war. Even after the victories at Dixon and Malachor's Revan understands that a few battles do not end a crusade that spans systems, sectors, and countless starships. The Mandalorians are more than warriors. They are a force of culture and will, a tide that flows across the galaxy, reshaping every world they touch. And Revan, the young Jedi General, must meet that tide at every point where it threatens the innocent. The next campaign begins on the world of Korriban, though not the Sith homeworld of legend, but a smaller, unassuming system where Mandalorian raiders have begun establishing supply lines. Ships arrive silently, carrying warriors accustomed to speed, precision, and the glory of battle. Revan's fleet, now seasoned by previous encounters, anticipates them, positioning itself to strike before the Mandalorians can fortify their position. His strategies, once experimental, are now refined, blending the unpredictability of Jedi intuition with the rigor of military calculation. Malak fights at his side, wielding his lightsaber with the calm certainty of a warrior who has seen countless engagements and survived. Mitra Sureka coordinates strike teams, guiding the flow of reinforcements and ensuring that no skirmish is left unexamined, no opening unexplored. Revanchists, once a small, secretive group of Jedi, now form a core command, each member trained to think independently yet act as a seamless extension of Revan's intent. The battle unfolds not as chaos, but as a series of deliberate, interwoven actions. Orbital bombardments weaken key positions, then ground forces sweep in, channeling Mandalorian troops into traps where they cannot maneuver. Blast of fire and the hum of lightsabers echo across the barren landscapes, punctuated by the low rumble of armored walkers crushing obstacles beneath their treads. Every movement, every advance is calculated to maximize advantage while minimizing unnecessary loss. A principle Revan adheres to even as the war grows bloodier. Even in victory, the cost is stark. Entire settlements are abandoned, civilians flee, and soldiers fall. Revan feels each death not as guilt but as a weight that reminds him of the delicate balance between action and consequence. He understands that the Mandalorians are both opponent and mirror. Each maneuver, each attack reflects a facet of the galaxy's violence and forces him to adapt, to evolve, and to question the very limits of what a Jedi should do in war. As the Mandalorian crusade deepens, entire star systems begin to mobilize. Governors call upon fleets, militias train in hidden corners, and civilians flee towards safer regions of space. The Republic, stretched thin, relies on Revan not only for tactical brilliance, but for the inspiration that keeps hope alive in the hearts of those who fear the overwhelming might of the Mandalorians. He becomes both general and symbol, a figure who embodies the determination of the Republic itself. On the battlefield of Desun once more, the Mandalorians regroup, determined to reclaim their lost honor and revenge their prior defeats. They strike with renewed intensity, their attacks more coordinated, their warriors more disciplined, and their commanders more cunning. Revan anticipates each move, not merely responding, but orchestrating the engagement, turning the Mandalorian strengths into liabilities and the chaos of battle into a controlled sequence of events that bends the fight to his will. Amid the intensity, Revan begins to reflect on the nature of the war. It is not merely a conflict of armies, it is a crucible of morality, testing his judgment, his temperance, and his adherence to Jedi principles. Each victory is shadowed by loss, each triumph tempered by the inevitable weight of death and destruction. He contemplates the Force, seeking clarity in the midst of turbulence, trying to balance the currents of light and dark that flow through the galaxy and through himself. Alec watches him closely, noting the changes that war impresses upon Revan. There is a hardening in his eyes, a determination that borders on obsession, and a willingness to embrace choices that once might have seemed unthinkable. And yet, Alec understands that this transformation is necessary, that the scale of the threat demands actions that are measured not by strict adherence to tradition, but by the urgency of survival. The Mandalorians are relentless. They strike at worlds where the Republic's fleets cannot reach in time. They burn, they pillage, they enslave. But each action leaves a trail, a pattern that Revan deciphers and uses to guide his next strike. The war becomes a chessboard, and he moves across it with patience, foresight, and the ability to anticipate not only the next step, but the step beyond. By the time the revanchists reach the deep core, the Mandalorians are on the defensive, struggling to maintain supply lines, morale, and cohesion. Revan pushes relentlessly, his forces cutting off reinforcements, isolating squads, and turning every Mandalorian victory into a trap for the next engagement. The Mandalorian lines, once unbreakable, begin to splinter under the weight of strategy, discipline, and unyielding pressure. Yet the war exacts a toll. Worlds lie in ruin, populations are displaced, and every victory comes with the quiet sorrow of lives extinguished. Revan internalizes these losses, allowing them to shape his decisions, his philosophy, and the very way he perceives the Force. He understands that war is not a series of isolated battles, but a continuous flowing current, one that will demand not only skill and courage, but an understanding of the deeper rhythms of power and influence. At the zenith of the campaign, Revan faces Mandalore himself on the battlefield of Malachor. Two leaders, each commanding the loyalty of thousands, each wielding strategy, will, and intuition as weapons. The confrontation is as much psychological as it is physical, a duel of perception and foresight, where one misstep could shatter entire fleets and undo months of careful planning. And Revan prevails, not through brute force alone, but through anticipation, adaptation, and an understanding of the Mandalorian psyche that allows him to turn their own pride against them. When the smoke clears, the Mandalorians retreat, defeated but unbroken, scattered yet determined to rise again. The Republic, exhausted but intact, breathes a temporary sigh of relief, and Revan, standing amidst the aftermath, feels both triumph and foreboding. For even as the Mandalorian threat diminishes, he senses the currents of destiny shifting, whispers of greater trials that wait beyond the horizon of this war. Revan has turned the tide. The Mandalorian crusade has been halted, yet the galaxy is changed. The seeds of future conflict are already planted, and the choices made here, in the heat of war, will echo across the decades. The Revanchist has become legend, a beacon of hope and a shadow of fear. And even in the quiet moments, when the stars hang silently overhead and the fleets drift in orbit, Revan knows that the greatest battles are not yet fought. For the Mandalorians were only the beginning. And in the stillness of space, the galaxy waits, holding its breath for the storm that will follow. The war had stretched across countless systems, leaving in its wake both ruin and revelation. Revan, now seasoned by years of combat and strategy, surveys the galaxy with eyes that have seen both the cruelty of men and the silent patience of the Force. Each battle fought, each victory claimed, has brought him closer to understanding the true scale of the conflict. Yet the closer he draws, the more he realizes that the Mandalorian threat is only a surface, a symptom of a deeper turbulence. In the council chambers of the Republic, whispers grow into debates, debates into confrontations. The Jedi Council watches Revan's rise with unease. His victories are undeniable, his strategies brilliant, but his methods increasingly unorthodox. The Revanchists, once seen as a small faction, have become the backbone of the Republic's defense, operating with autonomy and initiative beyond the Council's full control. Some masters worry that Revan's independence, his willingness to act where they hesitate, marks the beginning of a divergence between Jedi duty and galactic necessity. Revan himself feels the weight of these concerns, not as resentment, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the delicate balance he must maintain. The Force whispers guidance and warning alike, reminding him that power, however necessary, is a double-edged weapon. The choice before him is profound: to remain strictly within the Order's precepts, risking stagnation and failure, or to embrace the full breadth of his capability, stepping beyond the constraints of orthodoxy, knowing that such a path may carry consequences unforeseen. The Mandalorian War continues, relentless in its rhythm, and with each engagement, Revan's decision becomes more urgent. The fleets of Mandalore, though diminished by prior campaigns, still possess skill, speed, and a ferocity that demands not only tactical brilliance but also a profound understanding of leadership. Revan studies each confrontation as though it were a living lesson, learning the psychology of enemy commanders, the habits of troops, and the shifting currents of morale that can turn the tide of even the most carefully planned assault. In one decisive engagement near the planet of Onderon, Revan faces a situation that crystallizes his dilemma. A Mandalorian fleet threatens a system populated by civilians, many of whom are unaware of the war raging in the stars above. Revan's advisors suggest waiting for reinforcements, aligning with Council directives to avoid unnecessary risk. But to wait is to permit destruction, to surrender innocent lives to inevitability. And so, Revan chooses action. He orchestrates an audacious maneuver, dividing his fleet into smaller squadrons, baiting the Mandalorian forces into a trap designed not merely for victory, but for absolute disruption. Malak commands one wing, Xing the plan with precision, while Mitra Surik coordinates ground forces, ensuring that planetary defense and civilian evacuation proceed unhindered. The Mandalorian commanders, confident in their advantage, fall into the trap. Their fleet is encircled, their movements anticipated at every turn, and within hours, the battle is decisively in Revan's favor. Yet even as the victory is secured, Revan reflects on the costs. Some Mandalorian ships escape, scattering to the far reaches of the galaxy, their retreat a reminder that war is rarely absolute. Casualties on both sides weigh heavily, and Revan feels the subtle pull of a shadow he cannot yet name, a lingering sense that the choices made in victory may sow consequences unseen. It is in these quiet moments after battle, alone in the dim glow of a command bridge or beneath the silent stars of a war-torn system, that Revan contemplates the path ahead. The Mandalorians are formidable, but they are finite. The larger threat, the one hinted at in the tremors of the Force, remains invisible, patient, and unfathomably complex. Revan knows that the decisions he makes now will shape not only the outcome of the Mandalorian crusade, but also the destiny of the Republic itself. He begins to consider the tools of power beyond mere fleet movements and tactical genius. He studies the ancient archives, texts forbidden or overlooked by the Jedi, seeking knowledge that may grant insight into the deeper currents of the Force. He debates philosophy with allies and adversaries alike, testing the limits of morality, justice, and the use of power in a galaxy teetering on the edge of chaos. Each discussion, each decision, becomes part of a broader understanding, a preparation for choices that cannot be reversed. Malak, ever loyal, senses the tension growing within Revan. He sees the strain of responsibility, the burden of foresight, and the quiet transformation of his friend from a skilled Jedi into something more, a figure capable of bending the galaxy's tides with a mind as sharp as any blade. Mitra Surik, equally perceptive, offers counsel that is measured, precise, and often cautionary, reminding Revan that every action carries a shadow, every choice a consequence. The Mandalorians, sensing the shifting momentum, launch a series of increasingly desperate strikes. They target supply lines, civilian populations, and strategic outposts, hoping to destabilize Revan's careful orchestration. Where Revan, now seasoned and adaptive, counters with ingenuity, predicting movements, exploiting errors, and creating traps within traps that turn each assault into a lesson and an opportunity. Yet even in his mastery, a quiet unease lingers. The Force whispers hints of something older, something deeper than the Mandalorians themselves. It is subtle at first, a tremor beneath the surface of events, a shadow moving just beyond perception. Revan senses that to confront this unknown will require more than tactics, more than courage, more than loyalty. It will require a choice, a turning point that may redefine him, his companions, and the very nature of the Jedi Order. That turning point comes in the form of a Mandalorian stronghold on the planet Dantooine, chosen for its strategic value and symbolic resonance. Revan devises a plan that is both bold and morally complex, one that challenges the precepts of the Jedi, while ensuring the survival of countless innocents. He weighs every angle, every potential loss, every repercussion, and when the time comes, he acts, not with hesitation, but with the decisive authority of one who has seen both the fragility of life and the necessity of action. The battle is unlike any before. Blaster fire cuts through the night, lightsabers illuminate smoke-choked corridors, and the roar of engines shakes the ground. Revan moves at the heart of it, orchestrating maneuvers that force the Mandalorians to confront the full weight of his strategy. Every action is precise, every decision calculated, every risk acknowledged and embraced. When the smoke clears, the Mandalorian resistance on Dantooine is broken. Revan's choice, bold, unconventional, and morally challenging, has secured victory, but it leaves a lasting mark on his conscience. He understands now that leadership, power, and survival are bound not only to triumph, but also to the shadows cast by each decision. In the stillness following the storm, Revan looks out over the stars. He senses the future stirring, a tide of events that cannot yet be named, forces that will test him in ways far beyond the Mandalorian crusade. And in that silence, he realizes that the turning point has been reached, not merely in the war, but within himself. The path forward will demand choices that bend morality, challenge loyalty, and confront the very essence of the Force. The Mandalorian threat is diminished, but it is not the end. Greater shadows wait in the unseen reaches of the galaxy, whispering, shaping, and watching. Revan, having embraced his own decisive path, prepares to face not only enemies in flesh and blood, but the larger currents of destiny that ripple through the Force itself. And so at the precipice of destiny, the revanchist stands poised, aware that every choice henceforth carries the weight of the galaxy and the shadow of the self that he is becoming. Even in victory, the galaxy has a way of whispering truths that are not always comfortable. Revan, standing atop the bridge of a command cruiser, watches the stars drift silently past, and he feels it, a subtle, almost imperceptible tug in the Force. It is not a call to battle, nor a warning of immediate danger, but a presence, a dark current flowing beneath the surface of events, threading through the war-torn systems and brushing against the edges of his mind. The Mandalorians have retreated, scattered across the outer rim and beyond, licking wounds and regrouping. Yet Revan knows that they are only one part of a larger pattern. The war has revealed truths about the fragility of the Republic, the limits of the Jedi Council, and the immense power that flows through the Force, a power that can be bent, shaped, and if one is careful, controlled. He feels the seduction of that power in quiet moments, a whisper that promises the ability to end conflict swiftly, decisively, and without compromise. It begins in small ways at first. A strategy executed with near-perfect efficiency, a maneuver that turns what would have been a costly skirmish into an effortless triumph. The Force seems to flow more easily through him, giving clarity and speed that others cannot match. He notices how decisions that would have previously required deliberation now occur almost instinctively, and he feels a thrill in the certainty of his command. Malak notices the change. There is a subtle hardness in Revan's demeanor, a quiet confidence that borders on something more, something consuming. Malak speaks gently, reminding Revan of the teachings of the Jedi, the path of patience, of restraint, of service to the light. But Revan, ever attentive, nods quietly and reflects inwardly, sensing that the galaxy's survival may demand choices that the Jedi have not fully contemplated. Mitra Surik, attuned to both the Force and Revan's internal shifts, grows concerned. She watches the moments where Revan pauses over decisions, sensing not hesitation but calculation, a turning inward that borders on obsession. She warns him in measured tones that even the most righteous use of power can carry shadows, and that shadows, if nurtured, grow into forces capable of swallowing even the Hritten's intentions. Revan listens, acknowledging the truth in her words, yet he feels the weight of the galaxy pressing him toward action, urging him to embrace the currents he once feared. The dark whispering grows louder during campaigns into the Mid-Rim. Planets that were thought secure fall under new Mandalorian raids, and Revan must respond with speed and decisiveness. The Force provides insights that border on premonition, guiding fleets, predicting enemy movements, and enabling tactical feats that are almost uncanny in precision. And in the midst of these triumphs, Revan feels the seductive power of the dark side, its clarity, its immediacy, its capacity to bend events to will without the painstaking deliberation once required by the light. It is in the liberation of the planet of Telos IV that the shadow truly begins to make itself known. Revan orchestrates a flawless counterattack against a Mandalorian occupation, routing the invaders and sparing countless lives. But in the aftermath, he finds himself standing alone among the ruins, contemplating not the victory itself, but the method, the efficiency, the undeniable ease with which the outcome was shaped. The Force hums around him, heavy with potential, and he senses the possibility of achieving more faster, stronger, more completely if only he were willing to step beyond restraint. Malak notices the hesitation, the quiet fascination, and warns that such thoughts are dangerous. Mitra echoes the caution, reminding Revan that the dark side is not merely a tool, but a force that feeds on desire, on impatience, on the subtle erosion of principles. Revan nods, yet internally he wonders if the goal is peace, if the goal is the survival of countless innocent lives. Does it not justify a degree of expedience, a bending of the old rules? The whispers grow stronger with each subsequent battle. During a daring assault on a Mandalorian armory, hidden beneath the ice plains of Plutonia, Revan senses the Force guiding him with almost prescient accuracy. He maneuvers troops with precision that borders on the preternatural, striking at weak points that no standard reconnaissance could have revealed. The Mandalorian resistance collapses almost immediately under his direction, leaving him with the unnerving realization that the Force is not merely guiding, but almost responding to his will. Alone in his quarters, Revan contemplates what this means. The power is intoxicating, offering solutions that once would have seemed impossible. The temptation to embrace it fully, to wield the dark side as an instrument of decisive justice, begins to creep into his thoughts. He does not act rashly, yet he cannot deny the allure, the promise that he could end the war, protect the Republic, and shape the galaxy's destiny with a single, uncompromising hand. The first true test comes during the confrontation with a Mandalorian flagship near the planet of Dreshte. The vessel is heavily fortified, bristling with weapons, and capable of devastating Revan's fleet if not approached with exact timing. Revan senses a way to destroy it swiftly, a strategy that would require a subtle, precise use of Force techniques, bordering on manipulation of both minds and matter, a method traditionally forbidden by Jedi doctrine. He hesitates, weighing the immediate benefit against the moral cost, feeling the shadow in his mind, the quiet voice promising mastery, power, and certainty if he steps fully into it. Alec and Mitra sense the tension, the pull towards something dangerous and unfamiliar. They plead with caution, urging adherence to the Jedi path, reminding him that power without restraint becomes a predator, consuming the very intentions it once served. But Revan, standing at the precipice, feels the Force guiding him to action. He recognizes that this moment, this choice may define not only the outcome of the war, but the essence of who he is, the balance of light and dark within him, and the legacy he will leave upon the galaxy. And so, in the cold void of space, surrounded by fleets and warships, Revan makes the choice. He embraces the shadow, not wholly, not yet, but enough to harness its power, to achieve victory with a decisiveness impossible by other means. The Mandalorian flagship is destroyed, the fleet scattering in confusion and defeat, and the victory is absolute. But the whispering grows louder, more insistent, and Revan feels the first true stirrings of something profound and dangerous within himself. He has turned a page. The revanchist is no longer simply a Jedi, a commander or a tactician. He is something more, a figure straddling light and dark, aware of the seductive promise of power, yet still holding to the principles that allow him to act in defense of the galaxy. The shadow has emerged, and with it the path forward becomes uncertain, dangerous, and irresistible. As he gazes out at the stars, the galaxy silent and infinite, Revan senses the tides of destiny shifting. The Mandalorians are diminished, yet far from gone. And beyond them, beyond all known threats, lies a darkness older than the Republic itself, waiting for the moment when it can rise and test the choices Revan has made and the shadows he has begun to embrace. The turning of the tide has passed, and a new chapter begins. The shadow has taken root, subtle, patient, and unrelenting, and the galaxy, vast and unknowable, waits for the revanchist to step fully into the legacy that destiny and the Force has prepared for him. In the quiet moments between battles, Revan feels the weight of a galaxy slowly reshaping itself under his hand. The Mandalorians, though battered and scattered, continue to strike unpredictably, their raids sharp and violent, a reminder that no victory is permanent and no plan flawless. The Republic struggles to maintain cohesion across star systems, its governors and fleets stretched thin, relying on the leadership of the revanchist to hold together the fragile threads of civilization. And Revan, now both strategist and symbol, begins to sense a deeper truth, that war is not only fought in fleets and on battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of those who live under the shadow of conflict. He travels to systems that have been scarred by Mandalorian occupation, walking through cities of ash and rubble, speaking with leaders whose faces are lined with worry, and listening to civilians whose voices tremble with fear and hope alike. Each encounter, each conversation becomes a lesson, shaping his understanding of governance, loyalty, and the subtle forces that bind societies together even in the midst of war. He begins to see that the battle is as much about hearts as it is about weapons, that the strength of the Republic depends on the belief of its people as much as the skill of its armies. The forge of rebellion begins not in secret chambers or war rooms, but among these people, among the survivors, the oppressed, and the courageous who refuse to surrender to despair. Revan listens, learns, and inspires, showing that the Jedi are not merely warriors but guardians of justice, capable of giving hope where it has long been extinguished. From these interactions, a new force begins to form, a network of support that will become the backbone of resistance not just against the Mandalorians but against any threat that dares to destabilize the Republic. Alec observes quietly, noting how Revan's approach evolves beyond simple military command. He sees the care with which Revan considers the morale of Optimus, the strategic value of hope, and the importance of alliances forged not through coercion but through trust and shared purpose. Petra Surik joins him in these endeavors, her wisdom and insight helping Revan to navigate political currents, mediate disputes, and forge a sense of unity among diverse and often conflicting factions. As the Mandalorian crusade continues, Revan uses this understanding to build a web of coordinated resistance. Supply lines are protected, local militias trained, and planetary defenses reinforced, all while maintaining the appearance of decentralized organic rebellion. The Mandalorians, for all their cunning, begin to encounter resistance not only in open battle but in the subtle defiance of populations they assumed would be compliant. Revan has transformed the war from one of reaction to one of orchestration, turning the galaxy itself into a stage where every movement, every choice reinforces his broader strategy. In a series of carefully planned engagements across the Mid-Rim, Revan demonstrates the potency of this approach. Small fleets strike where Mandalorian forces are vulnerable, cutting off reinforcements, sabotaging supplies, and striking terror into the minds of their commanders. Local populations, emboldened by Revan's leadership, rise against occupying forces, further destabilizing the enemy and multiplying the effectiveness of his strategies. It is a war fought not only with sabers and blasters, but with influence, foresight, and the subtle manipulation of perception and expectation. Yet in the midst of this strategic brilliance, Revan continues to feel the pull of the dark side. The whisper of power is persistent, a constant presence in moments of solitude, urging him to take shortcuts, to wield his growing mastery of the Force as a blunt instrument rather than a disciplined tool. He acknowledges the temptation, feeling both fear and fascination, yet also a recognition that his purpose, the protection of the Republic and the survival of countless lives, requires a delicate balance between light and dark. It is a balance that will be tested again and again as the Mandalorian threat adapts, evolves, and refuses to yield completely. The next significant engagement comes at the planet of Deesun, where the Mandalorians have secretly regrouped. Revan learns of their plans through subtle intelligence gathering, using scouts, the Force, and careful deduction to anticipate movements that even seasoned commanders might overlook. The battle is long and grueling, fought across dense jungles, winding valleys, and crumbling ruins that echo with the memories of prior conflict. Casualties mount on both sides, and the horrors of war become undeniable. Revan pauses amidst the chaos, reflecting on the lives lost, the destruction wrought, and the immense responsibility he bears. It is in these moments that the forging of his character becomes most apparent, as he balances the necessities of war with the ethics of a Jedi, pushing him toward a deeper understanding of what it truly means to lead. Victory is achieved, but at great cost. Revan stands amidst the aftermath, looking out over the battlefield, and sees both triumph and tragedy intertwined. He senses the potential for the Mandalorians to return, regroup, and challenge the Republic again. But he also senses the growing strength of those he has inspired, the populations who now understand that resistance is possible, and that hope can endure even in the darkest of times. As he contemplates the next steps, Revan begins to consider the larger implications of his victories. The galaxy is fragile, a web of systems, cultures, and people connected through trade, diplomacy, and the subtle currents of the Force. Every battle he fights, every choice he makes, resonates across these threads, altering perceptions, alliances, and the very balance of power. He begins to see himself not only as a warrior, but as a catalyst, a force capable of shaping the course of history far beyond the immediate war. The shadow lingers, always at the edges of his consciousness. It is not malevolent yet, but it is patient, observing, whispering possibilities, urging consideration of actions that are both powerful and dangerous. And Revan, aware of its presence, embraces it as a tool to protect the galaxy, knowing that the line he walks is perilous and that one misstep could transform temptation into corruption. As fleets regroup and systems rebuild, Revan begins to cultivate a network of allies beyond the traditional Jedi, reaching out to senators, diplomats, and independent forces who share his vision for a stable republic. He works quietly, subtly, and with great care, ensuring that every alliance strengthens the foundation he is building, even as the Mandalorian threat continues to loom in the background. This is the true forge of rebellion, the shaping of hearts, minds, and destinies, creating a structure of resistance and hope that can endure even when war threatens to consume everything. And as he stands among his allies, gazing out into the starlit void, Revan senses that the battles fought thus far are only the beginning. The Mandalorians will strike again, the Republic will face further crises, and the shadow of the Force will continue to press upon him. Yet in this crucible, the Revanchist is tempered, strengthened, and readied for the greater challenges that lie ahead, aware that the forging is not complete, that the galaxy still has secrets to reveal, and that the choices he makes in the days to come will echo across the stars. The first step comes in the form of a long-abandoned star system, located deep in the Outer Rim, whose coordinates have been preserved only in fragmented historical texts. Revan and his trusted allies, Malak, Mitra, and the Revanchists, navigate a route through unstable hyperspace lanes, guided both by navigation charts and by Revan's attuned sense of the Force. The journey is long, and each hour spent traveling across the silent void gives Revan time to meditate, to focus, and to sense the layers of energy that permeate the galaxy. It is during these meditations that the first shadows of curiosity and temptation arise, coiling quietly around his awareness, suggesting possibilities that are at once frightening and fascinating. The system itself is a ruin, a testament to civilizations long vanished, planets scarred by time, and moons that drift in eerie, silent orbit. Yet, beneath the silence, beneath the apparent lifelessness, Revan senses a presence, a lingering memory of the Force, strong, dark, and structured, as though the energies of countless generations of Sith still pulse in hidden channels. He explores ancient tombs and forgotten temples, following cryptic inscriptions, symbols etched in stone and metal, and holocrons that hum faintly with power. Each discovery carries both revelation and warning, as though the past itself is testing his resolve, daring him to step further into a knowledge that could illuminate or corrupt the mind and spirit. Malak and Mitra observe carefully, sensing the tension within Revan. They recognize the danger, that the path to understanding the Sith is a path of shadows, one that promises insight but threatens moral compromise. Yet Revan is undeterred. He recognizes that to confront the larger challenges of the galaxy, to understand the Mandalorians, to secure the Republic, to guide the Jedi, he must comprehend the very forces that the Sith wield, the dark strands woven through the history of the Force. The deeper he delves, the more the secrets reveal themselves. Tales of ancient Sith Lords, their rise, their philosophies, and their methods of bending the Force to their will, unfold like threads in a vast tapestry. Revan studies not merely their tactics of war, but their understanding of the Force itself, their ways of harmonizing ambition with power, desire with control, and knowledge with application. Each insight is a revelation, yet also a test, a probe of his own willingness to bend rules, to push boundaries, and to confront the parts of himself that have always lingered in shadow. In a subterranean temple beneath the surface of a crumbling world, Revan discovers an ancient holocron, sealed with protections that have endured millennia. The holocron speaks to him directly, its voice both compelling and neutral, offering knowledge without judgment, yet implying consequences for those who seek to wield it unprepared. It recounts the stories of Sith who rose to immense power, the methods they used, the philosophical underpinnings of their dominion, and the ways in which the dark side of the Force can be a tool, a weapon, and a burden. As Revan listens, he senses the duality of its lessons, that power can protect or destroy, that ambition can elevate or consume, and that knowledge without discipline is dangerous in ways that few can endure. He spends hours, days, and perhaps even weeks in contemplation, learning the subtleties of the Force as the Sith understood it, absorbing principles that the Jedi have long neglected. Every new concept forces him to question not only the galaxy but his own identity, his values, and his vision for the Republic. He recognizes that the Sith were not mere monsters, as the stories told by Jedi often suggest, but thinkers, planners, and practitioners of a philosophy that seeks to master both the self and the cosmos. And in this recognition, Revan senses the thin line that separates insight from corruption, guidance from obsession, and power from tyranny. Alec observes the subtle shifts in Revan's demeanor, the moments of intense focus, the quiet whispers of thought, the way his eyes linger on symbols and texts as though they speak directly to his understanding. Mitra warns repeatedly that the temptation is natural, that the Force does not act outside of consequence, and that the allure of forbidden knowledge can become an ensnaring shadow. Revan listens, respects their counsel, yet continues, driven by the understanding that the galaxy will demand more than caution, that to secure peace he must grasp both the light and the dark. The culmination of this study comes with the revelation of a method, an approach to the Force that synthesizes knowledge of both Jedi and Sith practices. It is not mastery, not yet, but an understanding that the Force can be approached as a spectrum rather than as absolutes, a continuum where light and dark are tools to be understood, balanced, and wielded with discernment. Revan recognizes that this is a turning point, a moment that will define not only his approach to war, but the trajectory of his own soul. Returning from the ruins of the Outer Rim, Revan carries the weight of knowledge and the echo of shadows within him. He does not speak of all he has learned, for some truths are too subtle, too dangerous, to share freely. Yet he begins to implement the insights gained, weaving the principles of strategy, influence, and subtle manipulation into his command, refining the Republic's approach to conflict, and preparing for challenges that have not yet revealed themselves. Even as he consolidates these lessons, he senses that the galaxy itself is shifting. Unseen forces, ancient and patient, stir in response to his choices. The Mandalorian threat lingers, and the echoes of Sith philosophy have left their mark upon him in ways subtle but profound. Revan knows that knowledge is never neutral, that secrets of the past can illuminate or endanger, and that the next steps he takes will require both wisdom and courage, discipline and daring, insight and restraint. And so, with the shadow of understanding now partially embraced, Revan stands poised on the edge of destiny. The galaxy waits in silent anticipation, its systems trembling in expectation, its peoples unaware of the subtle currents that will shape the centuries to come. For in uncovering the secrets of the Sith, Revan has glimpsed the true complexity of the Force, and in doing so, has begun a journey whose consequences will reverberate far beyond any battle, any fleet, or any lifetime. The whispers of power, once faint, now pulse with clarity. The shadow has grown, patient, observant, and unyielding, and the revanchist, tempered by war and enlightened by forbidden knowledge, stands ready to confront the next stage of destiny, where the lines between light and dark will blur, and the galaxy itself will demand the courage to choose. The galaxy, vast and intricate, hums with tension, a quiet anticipation that even the most seasoned commanders feel but cannot fully name. Revan, standing aboard his flagship, senses the subtle shifts in the Force, currents that ripple through systems far beyond the reach of any Republic patrol or Jedi scout. The Mandalorian threat, though diminished, has left scars that run deeper than mere destruction. They have revealed vulnerabilities in the Republic structure, gaps in loyalty, and weaknesses in both strategy and spirit. But it is not the Mandalorians alone that stir the unrest. Whispers of dissent, ambition, and hidden agendas grow louder across star systems, carried on currents of politics, commerce, and old rivalries. The Jedi Council, wary yet constrained by tradition, debates endlessly over the future. Some masters perceive the danger of Revan's increasing independence, of his willingness to operate beyond standard doctrine, and they voice concerns that he is stepping into territory best left untouched. Others recognize his brilliance, his capacity to think beyond conventional strategies, and quietly support his efforts, even if they cannot openly endorse every choice. This division within the Council itself mirrors the tensions that stretch across the galaxy, revealing that even guardians of peace are not immune to conflict, ambition, and fear. Revan, aware of the Council's divided stance, does not act rashly. He understands that the balance of power, trust, and influence is delicate, and that one misstep could ignite a cascade of rebellion and chaos far beyond his immediate control. Yet he also senses that inaction is more dangerous than engagement, that the galaxy waits not for deliberation but for those capable of decisive, measured, and informed action. It is a realization that will guide him through the approaching storm, a recognition that leadership requires both courage and foresight, wisdom and audacity. As he prepares for the next campaign, Revan convenes with his closest allies, discussing strategy, intelligence, and the state of the Republic. Alex speaks with careful calculation, analyzing fleet movements, enemy resources, and potential points of vulnerability. Mitra offers insights into diplomacy, the hearts of populations, and the subtle interplay between power and persuasion. Together, they plan a series of operations designed to stabilize key systems, prevent uprisings, and maintain the fragile cohesion of a galaxy that has grown accustomed to conflict. Yet Revan senses a deeper, more insidious threat emerging, one that cannot be measured solely in fleets or armies. The dark whisperings of the Force grow more pronounced, carrying with them hints of ambition, betrayal, and the subtle corruption of ideals. He understands that the galaxy is not simply on the brink of war, it is on the precipice of a civil fracture, a schism that may divide not only the Republic, but the Jedi themselves. And the responsibility for navigating this fracture, for preventing catastrophe while pursuing victory, rests squarely upon his shoulders. In the Outer Rim, rumors spread like wildfire. Systems that once pledged allegiance to the Republic begin to question authority, governors debate loyalty, and mercenaries exploit instability for profit. Revan dispatches reconnaissance missions, carefully monitoring these shifts, noting patterns and anticipating where the first sparks of civil conflict may ignite. Each piece of intelligence adds to a larger mosaic, a portrait of a galaxy teetering between cohesion and chaos. The turning point comes when intelligence identifies a faction within the Republic, a coalition of senators and planetary leaders, who quietly harbor resentment toward both Revan and the Jedi Council. They see the Revanchist as a figure of immense influence, capable of challenging traditional authority, and they perceive an opportunity to shift the balance of power to their own advantage. Their motives are complex, a mixture of fear, ambition, and genuine concern for the Republic, but the effect is clear. A civil conflict looms on the horizon, subtle yet unstoppable. Revan convenes his inner circle to deliberate the implications. Alec warns that preemptive action, though tempting, could be misinterpreted as aggression, potentially triggering the very war they seek to avoid. Mitra advises careful diplomacy, the cultivation of alliances, and the reinforcement of loyalty through both deed and example. Revan listens, considering every argument, weighing every consequence, and meditating on the currents of the Force that seem to guide, warn, and challenge him simultaneously. It is in this crucible that Revan begins to take steps to prepare not only for battle but for the inevitable political and spiritual schism. He reinforces the loyalty of key systems, strengthening their defense and ensuring that populations see the Republic as a force of stability rather than a distant, indifferent authority. He cultivates relationships with influential figures, quietly persuading them of the necessity of unity, while simultaneously preparing contingencies should negotiations fail. And he begins to explore the deeper philosophies of the Sith once more, understanding that knowledge of both light and dark may provide the insight necessary to navigate the complexities ahead. As months pass, subtle signs of unrest become impossible to ignore. Fleets under Republic command begin to experience delays, sabotage, and unexpected attacks. Governors delay orders, and whispers of rebellion echo through council chambers and senate halls alike. Revan responds with a combination of strategic brilliance, diplomatic subtlety, and force intuition, threading a delicate path between confrontation and reconciliation. The galaxy becomes a stage upon which Revan's abilities, judgment, and understanding of the Force will be tested as never before. The first overt challenge arrives in the form of a planetary governor who refuses to acknowledge the authority of the revanchists. Revan, ever cautious, sends emissaries and negotiators, attempting to resolve the dispute without bloodshed. Yet the governor's defiance is calculated, the result of encouragement from hidden factions within the Republic who view the coming conflict as an opportunity to seize power. When diplomacy fails, Revan must carefully weigh the use of force, aware that every action will have consequences far beyond the immediate conflict. The first skirmishes of what will later be called the Jedi Civil War begin quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet their impact resonates throughout the galaxy. Revan commands with precision, striking only where necessary, guiding fleets, training forces, and using every advantage of strategy, intelligence, and force perception to minimize collateral damage. Even as conflict spreads, he focuses on the larger picture, the ultimate need to preserve the Republic, protect the innocent, and prepare the Jedi Order for the profound challenges that lie ahead. In private moments, Revan contemplates the weight of these choices. He understands that this war is different from the Mandalorian Crusade. It is not simply a battle against an external enemy, but a confrontation with loyalty, ideology, and the limits of morality. The shadow of the dark side, already present from his studies of the Sith, feels closer now, a subtle pressure that suggests expedience over caution, decisiveness over deliberation, and action over restraint. He acknowledges it, but he does not yield. He recognizes that the path ahead will require both mastery of the Force and mastery of self. The galaxy waits, silent and trembling. Systems, fleets, and populations hold their breath as the first fires of rebellion ignite, small yet potent, and as whispers of dissent echo through council chambers, senate halls, and war rooms alike. Revan, aware of the approaching storm, prepares himself for a conflict that will test not only his tactical genius, but his understanding of morality, loyalty, and the intricate currents of the Force. And in this anticipation, the revanchist feels the weight of history, the pull of destiny, and the quiet certainty that the galaxy is on the edge of a war that will define its future for decades to come. The galaxy, in its vast and silent expanse, waits unknowingly as a storm gathers, one that will shift the balance of power and reshape the destiny of countless worlds. Revan, the once celebrated hero of the Mandalorian Crusade, now finds himself facing challenges far beyond the immediate scope of battle. The currents of ambition, fear, and distrust begin to swirl around him, subtle yet undeniable. What began as cautious unrest among governors and planetary leaders now hardens into organized dissent, a coalition that views the revanchist not as savior, but as a threat to tradition, hierarchy, and personal ambition. These factions, hidden from public view, begin to orchestrate a sequence of events that will lead to confrontation, yet do so in a manner designed to cast Revan as the aggressor, the traitor, and the one responsible for fracturing the Republic. Revan, sensing the change through the Force, feels a disturbance unlike any before. It is more than mere anger or discontent, it is the precise shaping of consequence, a manipulation of loyalty and perception that spreads quietly, almost invisibly, across star systems. He recognizes that this is not a spontaneous uprising, but a deliberate orchestration, a test not only of his command but of his understanding of the galaxy, the Force, and the shadows that linger within his own heart. Whispers of the dark side, cultivated during his studies of the Sith, now feel more urgent, more insistent, and with them comes the seductive suggestion that decisive action, even if extreme, may be necessary to preserve the Republic. Alec and Mitra notice the tension, subtle yet potent, and they warn Revan repeatedly that the temptation to act with unchecked authority is dangerous, that even justified measures can become acts of tyranny, if not tempered by principle. Revan listens, contemplating their counsel, aware of the delicate line between necessary intervention and the erosion of trust that accompanies perceived betrayal. He meditates in quiet chambers aboard his flagship, the stars casting a silver glow across polished floors, as if the galaxy itself pauses to watch his choices, to judge his judgment, and to witness the unfolding of destiny. The first overt act that marks the beginning of what will be known as Revan's betrayal occurs on the planet of Terrace. A planetary governor, influenced by the secret coalition of dissenters, openly refuses Revan's directive to mobilize defenses against a minor Mandalorian incursion. Revan, assessing the situation through both strategy and the Force, recognizes that delay could allow the Mandalorians to gain a foothold, threatening not only the planet but the stability of neighboring systems. With careful precision, he orders a tactical strike, minimal yet effective, to secure the planet and prevent unnecessary loss of life. The action, though militarily justified, sparks outrage in the coalition, who portray Revan as overstepping his authority, as acting without the sanction of the Jedi Council or the Senate. Propaganda spreads quietly, but efficiently. Messages of rebellion are whispered in council halls, circulated among bureaucrats, and repeated in corridors of power. Soon, Revan's name, once synonymous with heroism and triumph, becomes associated with overreach, ambition, and the beginnings of what some term treachery. The shift in perception is gradual yet inexorable. Even allies begin to question his motives. Unsure whether his actions stem from loyalty to the Republic or from a desire for unchecked power, Revan, ever attuned to the Force, senses the growing divide, the fracture lines forming not on the battlefield but in hearts and minds, where loyalty is tested and influence can be manipulated subtly yet devastatingly. He understands that to navigate this he must act decisively, yet with clarity, discipline, and an awareness of the moral consequences that loom with every decision. The first major confrontation between Revan and his former allies occurs near the mid-rim systems. A fleet, commanded by a coalition admiral loyal to the dissenters, attempts to blockade Revan's forces, cutting supply lines and threatening planetary defenses he has worked to establish. Revan, weighing options carefully, orchestrates a maneuver designed not only to break the blockade, but to demonstrate precision, efficiency, and a strategic elegance that minimizes casualties on both sides. Yet the outcome, despite its success, is framed in propaganda as an act of aggression, an assault against Republic forces rather than a defensive measure against a threat. As the civil fractures widen, Revan is confronted by the Council. Masters who once respected him now question his judgment, his loyalty, and even the wisdom of allowing him command over such vast resources. Revan defends his actions calmly, explaining the strategic necessity, the protection of innocent lives, and the broader vision of stability. Yet his words fall on ears clouded with fear, suspicion, and political intrigue. The Jedi Council, wary of escalating conflict, calls for him to step down, to relinquish command, and to submit to an investigation into the decisions he has made during the Mandalorian campaigns. Revan's response is measured yet firm. He acknowledges the Council's authority, yet he also recognizes that the galaxy cannot wait for prolonged debate when the consequences of inaction are immediate and dire. In private, he meditates on the Force, on the balance of light and dark within himself, and on the knowledge of the Sith that whispers both caution and audacity. He realizes that the choices before him are not merely tactical but existential. To preserve the Republic, he may need to walk a path that the Jedi in their caution fear to tread. The moment of irreversible change arrives when Revan discovers a deeper conspiracy, a hidden faction within the Republic itself, secretly allied with Sith sympathizers, intending to destabilize and manipulate events to their own ends. This revelation crystallizes the necessity of his actions to protect the galaxy, to prevent collapse, and to guide the Jedi and the Republic through an unfolding storm. He must assume responsibilities that appear, externally, as betrayal. It is a choice that fractures his relationships, alienates former allies, and sets the stage for a conflict that will span the galaxy, one where morality, loyalty, and the Force itself are contested fields. Revan embraces the path reluctantly, knowing that history will judge him harshly. that the weight of perceived treachery will haunt him, and that the lines between hero and villain have already blurred in the eyes of the galaxy. He takes command of fleets, coordinates resistance against manipulative factions, and begins the careful orchestration of what will become known as the Jedi Civil War. Each decision, each deployment, each maneuver is measured against both tactical necessity and moral consequence, a balance of light and dark that will define his legacy for generations. The first battles of the Jedi Civil War erupt with sudden intensity. Republic fleets loyal to Revan clash with those led by dissenting commanders. Fleets that once marched under the same banners now turn against one another in a dance of strategy, deception, and devastating firepower. Planets become contested zones, systems fracture, and the galaxy trembles under the realization that a war within its own ranks has begun. Revan, though still guided by principles, begins to feel the shadows within himself deepen, drawn by necessity, by power, and by the relentless demands of leadership under impossible circumstances. He meditates, reflecting on the choices that have brought him here. The Mandalorian crusade was only the first crucible. The shadows of Sith knowledge were only a prelude. Now the galaxy itself challenges him, demanding that he act in ways that blur the lines between salvation and betrayal. The weight of the dark side grows more tangible, yet Revan wields it with care, understanding that while the shadows offer power, discipline and purpose must always temper desire. And so, standing atop the bridge of his flagship, observing both friend and foe, he knows that the fall is not into darkness alone, but into a crucible where the light and shadow of the Force converge, shaping a destiny that the galaxy will scarcely understand for decades to come. The Civil War has begun. The betrayals are set in motion, and the galaxy waits, trembling and silent, as Revan steps fully into a path from which there may be no return. The shadow has deepened, the lines between light and dark blur, and the story of the revanchist hero and traitor alike unfolds across the stars in a symphony of conflict, consequence, and destiny. After the initial fractures of the Jedi Civil War, the galaxy lies in a tense, uneasy calm, a fragile peace suspended above simmering chaos, like a thread pulled taut across the void. Revan, once the celebrated hero of the Mandalorian crusade, now walks a path shadowed by suspicion, betrayal, and the quiet judgment of those who cannot comprehend the necessity of his choices. The galaxy whispers his name with conflicting tones. Some speak it in awe, recalling victories that saved countless systems, while others murmur it in fear, associating him with treachery, rebellion, and the thin line between protector and conqueror. He feels the weight of perception pressing against him, heavier than any fleet of ships, deeper than any battlefield, more pervasive than any enemy strike, for the eyes of the galaxy are unyielding, and judgment is often swifter than justice. Revan retreats to a secluded system, a cluster of worlds largely untouched by the ongoing civil conflict. There, in the quiet expanse of unclaimed stars, he begins to rebuild not merely fleets and forces, but the understanding of himself and the Force that guides him. The teachings of the Sith, previously studied in fragments, now unfold in deliberate meditation, as he confronts the shadows within his own mind, seeking clarity, mastery, and the discipline necessary to wield power without succumbing to corruption. Each day, he trains, hones, and contemplates, walking among ancient temples, long-abandoned ruins, and the silent remnants of civilizations whose knowledge still resonates faintly in the Force. Alec and Mitra accompany him, serving as anchors to the principles of the Jedi, reminding him of light even as he delves deeper into shadow. They discuss strategy, philosophy, and the delicate balance between survival, power, and morality. Their conversations are measured, sometimes strained, always contemplative, for all three understand that the path Revan treads is one of both enlightenment and peril, and that the decisions made here will echo across the galaxy for decades to come. It is during these moments of reflection that Revan realizes a profound truth. To protect the Republic, to preserve what is just and necessary, he cannot act solely as a Jedi. The galaxy requires a new approach, one that blends the knowledge of the Jedi with the discipline, insight, and audacity of the Sith. He understands that the Force is not merely divided into light and dark, but exists as a spectrum, a continuum where power, wisdom, and intent intersect to shape the course of history. It is this understanding that solidifies his path. He will assume the mantle of Darth Revan, a name that embodies both mastery and the reconciliation of extremes. The formal adoption of this identity is not heralded with ceremony or announcement. It is internal, a quiet transformation marked by meditation, study, and the deliberate application of both light and dark principles. Revan trains in secret, constructing simulations of battlefield scenarios, experimenting with Force techniques that combine the precision of Jedi practice with the ruthlessness of Sith philosophy. He explores methods of command, diplomacy, and psychological influence, recognizing that the art of war is as much about shaping perception as it is about striking with blasters or sabers. Every encounter, every reflection, every strategy is a rehearsal for the inevitable confrontation with both the dissenting Republic forces and the lurking, ever-watchful shadows that seek to manipulate and dominate. In parallel, Revan cultivates alliances with those systems still loyal to the ideals of the Republic, but wary of council bureaucracy and political inertia. He moves subtly, encouraging the formation of autonomous fleets, training planetary militias and strengthening supply lines, while remaining undetectable to eyes that would report his intentions as rebellion. Intelligence networks expand under his guidance, channels of information weaving across star systems like delicate threads, allowing Revan to anticipate crises, detect conspiracies, and maneuver with almost preternatural foresight. It is a symphony of strategy and subterfuge, conducted with calm precision, discipline, and the quiet ruthlessness that comes from understanding the full spectrum of the Force. The shadow within Revan, once a subtle whisper, now pulses with a quiet intensity, urging exploration, experimentation, and daring. He listens carefully, harnessing its insights while remaining mindful of discipline, understanding that power without purpose corrupts, while knowledge without action stagnates. He experiments with Sith techniques that allow for rapid perception, preemptive strike, and manipulation of enemy thought, all tempered with Jedi ethics that preserve life and minimize unnecessary suffering. Through this synthesis, Revan grows not only in power but in awareness, insight, and subtle control, becoming a figure of immense complexity, a leader, a warrior, a philosopher, and a strategist simultaneously. Meanwhile, the galaxy outside remains unaware of the quiet transformation underway. Republic forces, spread thin and distrustful, struggle with internal divisions, unaware that the figure they perceive as a traitor is preparing to act in the interests of the greater good. Whispers of rebellion, of treachery, and of ambition swirl through the outer rim and mid-rim alike, growing in intensity, while Revan's hidden fleets and loyalists move unseen, securing vital systems and positioning forces for the battles to come. It is a careful balance, a dance between secrecy and readiness, where a single misstep could expose him prematurely, leading to annihilation or political collapse. Revan's personal meditation deepens, often extending into hours spent in contemplation atop deserted plateaus, within the ruins of temples long forgotten, and aboard ships drifting silently among the stars. He studies not only combat techniques but the nature of the Force itself, exploring visions, understanding currents, and learning to sense intentions, emotions, and weaknesses across vast distances. He begins to perceive the subtle energies that guide entire populations, the flow of loyalty and fear, hope and despair, weaving together into an invisible map of influence that spans sectors and star systems alike. It is a level of awareness that few achieve, a combination of intellect, intuition, and mastery of the Force that transforms him from a mere general into a true arbiter of fate. Alec and Mitra, while loyal, sense the danger inherent in this transformation. They counsel caution, emphasize ethics, and warn that the deeper Revan immerses himself in the synthesis of Sith and Jedi practice, the harder it may become to discern which actions are justified and which may be driven by shadow. Revan listens, nods, and absorbs their counsel, but the decisions remain his alone, guided by a blend of foresight, principle, and necessity. He recognizes that leadership is a solitary burden, that to shape the galaxy, he must sometimes walk paths that others fear, misunderstand, or condemn. As fleets and systems are prepared, Revan begins to test his new methods in small-scale engagements. Minor skirmishes against rogue elements, sabotaged convoys, and hidden conspiracies allow him to refine strategies, measure loyalty, and practice force techniques that meld Jedi control with Sith perception. Each encounter is both a test of tactics and a rehearsal for the inevitable larger confrontations, and each success reinforces his understanding of the delicate balance between light, dark, and the decisive use of power. The galaxy, meanwhile, continues its slow, uneasy drift toward war. Fleets loyal to dissenters patrol hyperspace lanes, governors hesitate to commit forces, and the shadows of Sith-aligned manipulation ripple across the Outer Rim. Revan watches, waits, and plans, knowing that the moment for decisive action is approaching, that the time for revelation and confrontation draws nearer with each passing cycle of stars. Finally, after months of preparation, Revan steps fully into his new identity, Darth Revan, a master of both light and dark, a strategist, philosopher, and harbinger of change. The first public act under this new mantle is both subtle and profound. The reorganization of loyal fleets, the consolidation of planetary militias, and the initiation of measures designed to confront both dissenters and conspirators without immediate, overt conflict. The galaxy senses the shift, though few understand its full scope, and the currents of anticipation, fear, and awe ripple outward, preparing the stage for the battles, betrayals, and revelations that will define this era. Revan, standing on the bridge of his flagship, gazes into the starlit void, feeling the weight of knowledge, power, and destiny converge. He is no longer merely a Jedi or a soldier. He is a figure forged by war, shadow, and insight, a being poised to reshape the fate of countless worlds through intellect, force mastery, and the disciplined use of both light and dark. The rise of Darth Revan is complete, yet the galaxy has yet to witness the full consequences of his transformation. And as he prepares to step into the wider conflict, the stars themselves seem to hold their breath, waiting for the next chapter of destiny to unfold. The galaxy trembles, though most worlds remain unaware, as the first true signs of internal strife ripple across the stars. Revan, now fully embracing the mantle of Darth Revan, positions his fleets with meticulous care, understanding that the opening moves of a civil war demand precision, subtlety, and an awareness of consequence unlike any ordinary battle. The Jedi Civil War is not a conflict marked solely by blaster fire or lightsaber duels. It is a war of ideology, influence, loyalty, and perception, where even a single misstep can transform victory into catastrophe. The first engagements are deliberate, calculated to test both resolve and skill, as Revan's forces confront systems swayed by dissenters, rogue commanders, and secretly Sith-aligned operatives embedded within the Republic. On the planet of Onderon, a minor skirmish demonstrates the subtlety of the war that is beginning. The planetary governor, emboldened by hidden factions in the Republic's Senate, attempts to seize control of local defense forces, interpreting Revan's prior directives as acts of tyranny. Revan, through carefully orchestrated maneuvers, demonstrates both force and restraint. His fleets intervene to prevent bloodshed, while simultaneously neutralizing the governor's ability to interfere further, creating an example without tipping the scales toward overt oppression. It is a delicate balance, one that tests not only military skill but psychological insight, for the eyes of neighboring systems observe every action, waiting to interpret the meaning behind the movements of ships and the deployment of troops. The Jedi Council, aware that Revan has stepped beyond the bounds of traditional command, sends envoys to confront him. Their arrival is met not with hostility, but with calm and deliberate explanation. Revan outlines the necessity of his actions, the unseen threats manipulating the Republic from within, and the broader vision of stability he seeks to achieve. Yet their skepticism is palpable. The Masters argue that even with noble intent, the perception of overreach is dangerous, and that the seeds of civil war may sprout from actions taken without council approval. Revan listens patiently, absorbing the arguments, acknowledging their concerns, yet understanding that hesitation and indecision may cost the lives of countless innocents across multiple systems. The first coordinated battles of the Civil War occur in the Mid-Rim, where fleets loyal to dissenting factions attempt to blockade hyperspace lanes and seize planetary resources. Revan, employing strategies learned both from the Jedi and from his studies of Sith tactics, orchestrates maneuvers that neutralize these forces with minimal casualties, prioritizing disruption over destruction and positioning over annihilation. His forces strike with precision, using smaller, faster ships to bypass blockades, while larger capital ships secure key positions in orbit, establishing control without unnecessary devastation. At the same time, Revan sends envoys to loyalist systems, ensuring that the populace remains supportive, morale is maintained, and loyalty is reinforced through example and communication rather than coercion. On the ground, planetary militias trained under Revan's guidance begin to act with remarkable coordination, reflecting the careful blending of Force insight and tactical expertise instilled by their leader. Mitra leads units in ensuring that civilians remain safe, providing medical aid and protection from rogue elements, while simultaneously reinforcing the strategic objectives of Revan's command. Alec oversees fleet coordination, analyzing patterns of movement, predicting enemy maneuvers, and adapting in real time to counter unexpected resistance or sabotage. Together, this triumvirate of leadership embodies both the discipline of Jedi training and the strategic cunning gleaned from Sith study, a fusion that makes their operations effective, subtle, and morally tempered. Despite these careful preparations, the Civil War spreads, as perception and rumor travel faster than fleets or communications. Some systems, interpreting Revan's defensive actions as aggressive overreach, rise in rebellion, influenced by senators, governors, and hidden conspirators who exploit the ambiguity of command for their own gain. Skirmishes erupt unexpectedly on planets far from the initial theaters of action, forcing Revan to balance immediate tactical needs against the larger strategic picture of maintaining loyalty, protecting civilians, and minimizing bloodshed. The galaxy, already fractured by the Mandalorian crusade and internal divisions, begins to feel the pressure of uncertainty, its populations anxious, fearful, and increasingly aware that old alliances may no longer hold. Revan's understanding of the Force becomes pivotal in these moments. He senses currents of loyalty, fear, ambition, and manipulation that ripple invisibly across star systems, allowing him to anticipate conflicts, predict betrayals, and position his forces with a foresight that seems almost prescient. It is a mastery of perception, strategy, and moral judgment that few have ever achieved, a fusion of insight and power that distinguishes Revan as both leader and arbiter of galactic destiny. Yet even as he exercises this control, he remains aware that the shadow within him, cultivated through study of Sith philosophy, is never far, whispering possibilities of expediency, dominance, and absolute power. Alec and Mitra continue to act as anchors, reminders of restraint, compassion, and morality. Though Revan knows that the further the war spreads, the more difficult it will become to temper his actions with their guidance. The first major fleet engagements demonstrate the effectiveness of Revan's strategies. Dissenter forces are outmaneuvered, communications disrupted, and supply lines cut, yet loss of life is minimized wherever possible. Revan employs the dark side cautiously, using it to anticipate enemy movements, sense hidden threats, and subtly influence outcomes, never to dominate or without purpose. This measured approach creates both awe and fear among allies and enemies alike, as the galaxy begins to whisper of a figure capable of both brilliance and ruthlessness, whose actions defy simple categorization. The conflict escalates further as core systems begin to choose sides, swayed by the perception of Revan as either savior or tyrant. Some systems, loyal to dissenting senators, initiate defensive fortifications, preparing for sieges that may never come, while others, inspired by Revan's strategic foresight and moral calibration, align with him in quiet but resolute support. It becomes a war not only of fleets and armies, but of hearts, minds, and perception, where propaganda, rumor, and the subtle influence of the Force shape the outcome as much as lightsabers or starships ever could. Revan, meditating in private chambers between campaigns, contemplates the weight of these choices. He reflects on the delicate balance between necessity and morality, between the practical use of power and the ethical obligations of leadership. He understands that every engagement, every maneuver, every decision is a test not merely of skill, but of character, that the shadow within him is a constant presence, a reminder that mastery over the Force is inseparable from mastery over oneself. As the war progresses, Revan begins to see the threads of a larger conspiracy, forces manipulating events from behind the scenes, Sith-aligned agents who seek not merely chaos but the transformation of the Republic itself. He recognizes that the conflict cannot be won through fleets alone. It requires strategy, insight, and the careful deployment of both Jedi and Sith principles, a blend that has never before been attempted. The galaxy watches, largely unaware, as the first moves of a war that will shape its future take place with quiet intensity, fleets maneuvering, systems choosing sides, and Revan standing at the center, a figure of foresight, power, and inevitability. And in this moment, as the first fires of civil war burn across star systems, Darth Revan feels the full weight of destiny pressing against him. The shadows of the Force urging action, the currents of morality demanding discernment, and the galaxy waiting silently for the story that will define this age. The galaxy, once held together by the fragile bonds of the Republic, begins to fracture under the weight of distrust, ambition, and fear. Revan, now fully aware of both the visible and hidden currents shaping the conflict, moves with quiet precision, positioning fleets, securing systems, and orchestrating alliances that are as much about perception as they are about force of arms. Even planets that had remained neutral during the Mandalorian Crusade now find themselves pressured to choose sides, their governors weighing the risks of rebellion against the certainty of observation by Revan's loyalists. Every choice, every declaration, every minor skirmish sends ripples outward, touching neighbors, alerting allies and enemies alike, and creating a cascade of consequences that grows with each passing cycle of stars. In the mid-rim, systems once considered stable now experience subtle insurgencies, small groups of dissidents, emboldened by the perceived weakness of the Republic and the shadow of Revan's prior actions, launch raids on supply lines, sabotage communication networks, and challenge local governance. Revan responds with deliberate measures, employing fleets to contain threats, using diplomacy to bring systems back into alignment, and relying on intelligence networks to anticipate and counter further disruptions. He understands that these early interventions are not merely tactical. They set the tone for the broader conflict, demonstrating both his strategic brilliance and his willingness to act decisively without tipping into indiscriminate aggression. The Outer Rim presents an even greater challenge. Many systems there, historically distant from the Senate's influence, are tempted by promises from dissident leaders and Sith sympathizers who offer protection, autonomy, and reward in exchange for allegiance. Revan carefully navigates these temptations, meeting with planetary leaders, offering security and stability, and quietly neutralizing agents who seek to manipulate local politics for Sith advantage. He employs subtle demonstrations of power, showing that resistance is futile, not through overwhelming violence but through strategic dominance and the quiet inevitability of his planning. Malak coordinates fleet movements with surgical precision. Each maneuver is calculated to intercept enemy supply lines, secure hyperspace lanes, and maintain the momentum of Revan's forces without provoking unnecessary escalation. He monitors patterns of rebellion, predicting where insurgencies will flare next, and adapts in real time to ensure that each engagement strengthens Revan's position while minimizing loss of life and infrastructure. Mitra, meanwhile, oversees ground operations, ensuring that planetary defenses operate smoothly, civilians remain protected, and local leaders feel supported rather than coerced. Despite these careful preparations, the spread of the war is relentless. Propaganda campaigns, subtle manipulations, and hidden Sith influence fuel unrest, leading to clashes in regions previously considered secure. Star systems once loyal to the Republic find themselves torn between allegiance and survival, between fear of Revan's shadow and the desire to resist manipulative forces. The galaxy becomes a chessboard, with every fleet, every planetary militia, every spy and agent acting as a piece in a vast and complex game, whose outcome remains uncertain even to those playing it. Revan recognizes that the Civil War is no longer a conflict of immediate threats alone. It is a test of influence, ideology, and moral leadership. He begins to employ psychological tactics, subtle demonstrations of the Force, and calculated risk to sway populations and commanders, convincing systems to remain loyal through perception as much as through necessity. The dark side, always a presence at the edges of his consciousness, offers shortcuts, promises of absolute control, but Revan tempers these urges with meditation, reflection, and counsel from his most trusted allies. He understands that a true leader must balance power and principle, that the end cannot justify every means, and that history will judge not only the results of a war, but the manner in which it is conducted. Across the Mid-Rim, minor engagements escalate into full-scale battles. A small planetary system loyal to Revan is besieged by a fleet loyal to dissenting senators, forcing him to act with both speed and restraint. His forces strike with precision, disabling enemy ships without catastrophic destruction, while simultaneously protecting civilian populations and infrastructure. News of these engagements spreads, interpreted differently by each observer. For allies, it is the wisdom of measured command. For enemies, the shadow of tyranny looms. Meanwhile, secret Sith-aligned factions continue to manipulate events. They strike from hidden bases, influence governors, and coordinate insurgencies, seeking to exploit the Civil War to destabilize the Republic further. Revan, aware of their presence through the currents of the Force, prepares countermeasures, deploying loyal agents and subtly guiding systems back into alignment. Each confrontation strengthens his understanding of the dark side, its allures, its utility, and its danger, reinforcing the need for discipline, foresight, and moral clarity. Revan's leadership begins to shape the very culture of the Republic. Planets learn to rely on his foresight, militias adopt tactics inspired by his strategies, and fleets operate with coordination previously unseen outside the Jedi military framework. Even those who remain skeptical of his motives begin to recognize the efficacy of his command, acknowledging that the Revanchist's actions preserve stability in a galaxy increasingly threatened by internal and external forces. Yet, the shadow of fear remains, for perception is malleable, and even the most loyal observers know that Revan's mastery of both light and dark makes him unpredictable, formidable, and to some frightening. As the war spreads, Revan cultivates a network of spies and informants across enemy lines. They report on fleet movements, hidden bases, and the intentions of dissenting senators and commanders, providing him with the intelligence necessary to anticipate attacks before they occur. These agents operate in secrecy, invisible to even the most vigilant enemies, allowing Revan to orchestrate defenses and strikes with near-perfect timing. It is a system of information and strategy that mirrors the vastness of the galaxy itself, intricate, interconnected, and almost impossible to predict by those outside his inner circle. The psychological component of the war becomes increasingly critical. Revan understands that loyalty is fragile, that fear can be as effective as blasters, and that influence often matters more than numbers. He leverages this understanding, demonstrating restraint and calculated power, ensuring that allies feel protected, populations feel secure, and enemies are discouraged without pushing them into desperation that could trigger uncontrollable conflict. Through these methods, Revan turns the spread of the Civil War into a study of strategy, morality, and the art of command, where every action is weighted, every decision measured, and every outcome anticipated. The first major turning point comes when a mid-rim system loyal to dissenters attempts to ally with secret Sith agents. Revan intercepts communications, predicts the maneuver, and positions fleets to neutralize the threat without direct confrontation, demonstrating both the reach of his intelligence network and the precision of his strategic planning. The system remains under nominal control of the Republic, yet the enemy perceives Revan's power as a warning, altering their movements, recalculating strategies, and hesitating where once they might have acted boldly. It is a psychological victory as much as a tactical one, reinforcing his authority and reshaping perceptions across multiple sectors. Meanwhile, Revan continues to refine his personal connection to the Force. He practices techniques that allow him to sense not only physical movements, but the currents of loyalty, fear, and ambition that ripple across star systems. Through meditation, visualization, and the disciplined application of both Jedi and Sith teachings, he becomes a living nexus of insight, influence, and foresight, able to anticipate the consequences of even minor actions on planets thousands of light years apart. It is a mastery that few have ever achieved, and one that reinforces the sense of inevitability surrounding his rise, his strategy, and the course of the war itself. The galaxy feels the spread of the Civil War, not just in battles, but in the quiet tension between star systems. Fleets move cautiously, governors hesitate, and populations live with the uncertainty that even the most minor engagement could escalate into devastating conflict. Yet in the midst of this growing tension, Revan's forces operate with calm, precision, and purpose, demonstrating that the war is not chaotic, but guided by a mind both disciplined and visionary. And in every movement, every decision, every engagement, the galaxy begins to understand that the figure of Darth Revan is not simply a commander or a hero, but a force capable of reshaping the course of history itself. As fleets maneuver, systems align or rebel, and the unseen hand of the Sith manipulates where possible, Revan stands at the center of a conflict that has spread beyond his imagination. He knows that the war will continue to expand, that battles yet to come will test his leadership, morality, and mastery of the Force to their limits. And as he gazes at the stars, silent and eternal, he feels the full weight of destiny pressing upon him, aware that the spread of the Civil War is only the beginning of a struggle that will define the galaxy for generations to come. The galaxy quivers beneath the unfolding shadow of war. Yet in the midst of chaos, Revan's clarity is absolute, a beacon of strategy, insight, and disciplined power that guides the course of events with deliberate inevitability. As the Civil War spreads to systems previously untouched, Revan orchestrates campaigns that are both monumental in scope and subtle in execution, blending fleet maneuvers, planetary operations, and the careful shaping of perception across light years of space. He strikes only when necessary, seizes critical positions with precision, and ensures that his actions, even when forceful, carry minimal collateral damage, thereby strengthening the loyalty of those under his influence while demonstrating the futility of resistance to those who oppose him. It is not conquest for its own sake. It is calculated, purposeful, and guided by the principles he has fused from both Jedi and Sith teachings. Sid. The first major turning point occurs in the Mid-Rim, where a coalition of dissenting systems attempts to coordinate an attack on supply lines supporting Revan's loyalist forces. Through foresight, intelligence, and subtle Force guidance, Revan anticipates the attack, positioning his fleets in a manner that transforms a potential disaster into a decisive victory. Enemy ships are intercepted with minimal loss, insurgent leaders captured or neutralized, and key hyperspace routes secured, ensuring both strategic advantage and the perception of inevitability surrounding Revan's command. It is a demonstration of both tactical brilliance and psychological mastery, reinforcing the growing reputation of Revan as a figure whose influence extends far beyond the immediate battlefield. In the Outer Rim, the war's escalation presents a more complex challenge. Many systems, remote and traditionally autonomous, face pressure from secret Sith-aligned operatives who exploit local unrest, promising power and autonomy to those who resist Revan's influence. Revan responds with a combination of diplomacy, subtle intimidation, and selective deployment of loyalist forces, demonstrating that opposition, while not destroyed, is rendered ineffective and guided toward reconciliation with the Republic's stabilizing vision. Through these actions, entire sectors begin to realign not through coercion alone, but through perception, understanding, and the quiet assertion of Revan's strategic and moral authority. Revan's personal mastery of the Force deepens with each engagement. He senses not only the positions and intentions of enemy forces, but also the undercurrents of loyalty, fear, and ambition that ripple across star systems, allowing him to anticipate events with uncanny precision. The shadow within him, tempered by ethical reflection and counsel from Mitra and Malak, provides insight into opportunities that would be invisible to those adhering strictly to the light side, while the light ensures restraint, compassion, and purpose in his actions. This duality becomes his greatest asset, allowing him to act with both ruthlessness and wisdom, creating outcomes that preserve life while achieving strategic dominance. A pivotal moment arises on the planet of B-Zone, where local insurgents, aided by Sith operatives, attempt to destabilize the region and draw loyalist forces into an ambush. Revan, aware of the potential trap, uses the terrain, timing, and force insight to turn the ambush into an opportunity, trapping enemy forces between maneuvering fleets and planetary defenses. The battle is swift, efficient, and precise, ending with minimal casualties among civilians and loyalist troops while decimating the insurgent leadership. It is a masterclass in strategy, a demonstration of foresight, and a turning point that signals to the galaxy the growing competence, power, and inevitability of Revan's campaign. Throughout these campaigns, Revan maintains close counsel with Mitra and Malak, valuing their guidance while asserting the necessity of independent decision-making. Their discussions, often long and contemplative, explore not only tactics but philosophy, morality, and the subtle balance between power and responsibility. They examine every major operation, every engagement, every psychological maneuver, ensuring that actions taken are not only effective but aligned with the vision of stability and preservation that Revan seeks to impose. It is a delicate equilibrium, a blend of loyalty, counsel, and autonomous judgment that reinforces Revan's role as both commander and moral arbiter. The psychological dimension of conquest becomes increasingly evident. Systems observing Revan's victories begin to reconsider allegiances. Populations perceive him as both protector and inevitable authority, and dissenters hesitate, constrained by the knowledge that resistance carries not only risk but futility. Even those who have long harbored resentment or ambition find themselves recalculating, adjusting strategies, and in some cases, aligning with Revan not through loyalty alone, but through the recognition of his overwhelming strategic and force-derived insight. This perception, carefully nurtured through measured displays of power, diplomacy, and intelligence, becomes as critical to conquest as any fleet or army under his command. Malak coordinates simultaneous strikes across multiple systems, exploiting weaknesses identified through intelligence and force insight. Each engagement is designed to neutralize resistance, secure key positions, and minimize civilian harm, reflecting Revan's philosophy that conquest must be precise, moral, and ultimately stabilizing. Mitra oversees planetary operations, ensuring that civic infrastructure, supply chains, and civilian populations are protected even as military operations unfold around them. Together, this triumvirate of leadership demonstrates that Revan's conquest is not one of indiscriminate power, but of strategic, disciplined, and ethically informed mastery. The galaxy begins to respond not just to Revan's victories, but to the growing legends surrounding him. Whispers circulate of a commander capable of predicting enemy movements, guiding entire sectors with foresight, and balancing the darkest impulses of power with the wisdom of restraint. Some fear him, believing that such control can only lead to tyranny. Others admire him, seeing a stabilizing force amid the chaos of war and dissent. This duality mirrors the path Revan has chosen, a fusion of light and dark, of philosophical depth and strategic brilliance, and it becomes a defining characteristic of the Civil War itself. A critical juncture emerges when a coalition of Outer Rim systems, secretly manipulated by Sith-aligned conspirators, attempts to consolidate power and challenge Revan's growing influence. Revan responds with subtlety, using intelligence to anticipate coalition movements, positioning fleets to intercept without direct confrontation, and employing diplomacy to fracture their unity from within. The outcome is decisive. The coalition is neutralized without large-scale destruction, and its member systems realign under Revan's stabilizing influence. This operation demonstrates not only military brilliance but the power of foresight, persuasion, and the careful application of both Jedi and Sith-derived insight. As the Civil War continues to spread, Revan begins to understand the long-term consequences of his campaign. Every system secured, every enemy neutralized, Every strategic advantage gained contributes not only to immediate success but to the broader shaping of galactic politics, perceptions, and power structures for years to come. He contemplates the ethical weight of each decision, the shadow of ambition that lurks in every choice, and the necessity of balancing personal insight with counsel, foresight with morality, and strategy with compassion. It is a burden that few can comprehend, a solitude tempered by the presence of trusted allies, and a constant reminder that leadership demands both vision and restraint. Revan's conquest, while calculated, is not devoid of danger. Rogue elements, hidden Sith sympathizers, and rebellious factions continue to test his control, striking unexpectedly and forcing rapid adaptation to preserve stability. Through these engagements, Revan refines both his tactical approach and his philosophical understanding of power, learning that victory requires more than strength. It requires insight, perception, and the disciplined application of knowledge across space and time. Each turning point, whether in battle, diplomacy, or perception, becomes a lesson, shaping not only the immediate outcome of the Civil War but the character and legacy of Darth Revan himself. The galaxy, in this era, begins to see the war not merely as a series of battles, but as a test of will, intellect, and moral discernment. Revan's actions redefine what it means to wield power, blending strategy, force mastery, and philosophy into a single, coherent approach that influences allies and enemies alike. The spread of the Civil War, the conquests, the careful positioning of fleets, and the subtle shaping of perception all demonstrate that Revan's campaign is as much about shaping destiny as it is about winning battles. And as the stars themselves seem to hold their breath, the galaxy begins to sense that Revan is no ordinary leader, but a figure whose mastery over the forces of war, diplomacy, and the Force may ultimately decide the fate of countless worlds. The galaxy, stretched thin by civil conflict, trembles under the strain of divided loyalties as the forces of the Jedi, once unified in purpose, find themselves scattered and tested against the cunning and foresight of Revan's growing power. Loyalist Jedi, tasked with defending the Republic, face not only the tactical brilliance of Revan's command, but also the moral ambiguity that accompanies a leader who blends the light and dark, whose strategies confound expectations and challenge their fundamental understanding of justice. Skirmishes erupt across countless worlds, where Jedi defenders engage with Revanchist forces in environments ranging from dense urban sprawl to barren wastelands, from forested planets whispering with unseen life to orbital stations suspended silently among the stars. Every engagement, while violent in appearance, is underscored by the subtle currents of strategy, perception, and force-guided foresight, as Revan manipulates both space and morale to undermine the cohesion of Jedi loyalists without unnecessary destruction. On the planet of Taris, a critical turning point emerges. A coalition of Jedi loyalists attempts to establish a stronghold in the lower levels of the city world, seeking to draw Revan into a direct confrontation that might rally hesitant systems to their side. Revan, anticipating the move through the currents of the Force and intelligence networks, maneuvers his forces above the planet, controlling orbital access and supply lines, ensuring that the loyalists are isolated without endangering the civilian population. He deploys precision strikes against infrastructure critical to enemy operations while simultaneously establishing humanitarian corridors, a demonstration of strategy that confounds traditional expectations and positions him as both conqueror and guardian. The battle for Taris becomes a study in the careful application of power. Jedi loyalists, skilled and resolute, are forced to confront the reality of Revan's dual mastery of Jedi and Sith techniques, facing maneuvers that anticipate their every action, defenses that adapt in real time, and psychological tactics that exploit fear, doubt, and hesitation. Malak coordinates fleet movements with near-perfect timing, ensuring that supply disruptions, orbital strikes, and reinforcements all unfold in a manner that isolates enemy forces while preserving essential systems. Mitra orchestrates planetary defense, guiding loyalist confrontations into controlled engagements that neutralize threats without triggering mass destruction, a careful balance that reflects both the strategic and ethical framework Revan enforces. As the Taris campaign progresses, the psychological toll on Jedi loyalists becomes evident. Commanders find their assumptions challenged, strategies countered before execution, and the Force itself seeming to favor Revan's insight over their own. Despite bravery and skill, their operations falter, communications are intercepted, and minor miscalculations escalate under the pressure of Revan's anticipation. It is a slow, methodical collapse of resistance, not through overt brutality but through strategy, foresight, and the subtle assertion of inevitable dominance. Elsewhere, systems in the mid-rim that had remained neutral begin to perceive the tide of conflict shifting. Governors and planetary councils, observing Revan's victories and the failures of loyalist forces, reconsider allegiances, some opting for quiet submission, others seeking reconciliation through diplomacy and strategic alignment. Revan, aware of these shifts, acts not with arrogance but with calculated engagement, sending envoys, securing vital systems, and demonstrating that alignment with his vision ensures stability, protection, and influence rather than subjugation. This careful balance of authority and mercy reinforces his ascendancy, cultivating loyalty not through fear alone, but through recognition of competence, foresight, and fairness, however measured. A series of fleet engagements in the Outer Rim further solidify Revan's position. Coalitions of loyalist Jedi, encouraged by Sith agents and dissenting senators, attempt to cut off hyperspace routes and disrupt supply chains, critical to Revan's forces. Revan anticipates these maneuvers, deploying rapid response fleets, intercepting enemy convoys, and using subtle Force influence to predict and counter tactical decisions, neutralizing threats with minimal bloodshed. The outcome is decisive. Loyalist fleets are either captured, scattered, or forced to retreat, while critical routes remain under Revan's secure control, demonstrating the growing inevitability of his ascendancy. Throughout these operations, Revan continues his personal exploration of the Force. He examines the interplay of light and dark, using insight gained from each engagement to refine his understanding of power, responsibility, and consequence. The shadow within him, once a whisper, now speaks more persistently, offering shortcuts, promises of unchallenged authority, and visions of absolute dominion. Yet he tempers this with reflection, counsel, and deliberate meditation, understanding that yielding entirely would destabilize not only his moral compass, but the delicate balance of loyalty and order he seeks to maintain across the galaxy. Alec and Mitra continue to anchor his decisions. Their guidance ensures that strategy is tempered by morality, that victories do not descend into cruelty, and that the operational effectiveness of the campaign aligns with the vision of stability Revan strives to impose. Discussions between them are long, deliberate, and contemplative, often extending into hours of shared reflection on battles fought, choices made, and the consequences yet to come. This council creates a dynamic of accountability, ensuring that Revan's ascendancy is tempered, deliberate, and purpose-driven rather than impulsive or purely self-serving. As the Civil War continues, a pattern emerges. Systems previously loyal to Jedi leadership begin to fracture, some defecting quietly to Revan's side, others resisting until engagement proves futile, while still others fall under the subtle influence of Sith operatives who exploit gaps in coordination and morale. Revan's ascendancy is not achieved through brute force alone, but through perception, foresight, and the careful orchestration of influence that spans fleets, planetary governments, and Force-sensitive operatives. It is an ascendancy built as much on intelligence and psychological mastery as on starships and lightsabers, demonstrating a synthesis of all forms of power the galaxy recognizes. A key turning point occurs during the engagement over Malachor Vev, a planet steeped in history and the residue of ancient conflicts. Loyalist Jedi, believing the strategic importance of the planet sufficient to commit all forces, launch an offensive intended to cripple Revan's hold in the sect. Revan, anticipating the operation, employs a combination of deception, maneuver, and precision strikes, exploiting both terrain and Force perception to draw the Loyalists into disadvantageous positions. The battle unfolds as a study in controlled chaos. Forces appear evenly matched, yet Revan's planning and insight create openings that, when exploited, decimate Loyalist coordination while preserving infrastructure and minimizing civilian casualties. The aftermath of Malachor V solidifies Revan's reputation. Systems that had doubted his intentions now align. Recognizing both the futility of opposition and the stabilizing effect of his leadership, the Jedi loyalists, battered and demoralized, retreat to regroup, understanding that the war is no longer one of simple engagement but of strategy, foresight, and the inexorable momentum of Revan's ascendancy. And in this moment, as fleets reposition and planets reconsider their loyalties, Revan stands not only as a military genius, but as a figure whose power, influence, and understanding of the Force make him the unavoidable center of a galaxy in flux. Even as he consolidates control, Revan contemplates the cost of victory. The shadow of war lingers in the air. The lives affected by even carefully measured campaigns weigh on his conscience, and the balance of light and dark within him grows ever more acute. He knows that the ascendancy achieved is not an endpoint but a threshold, the precursor to challenges that will test not only his strategy but his morality, his vision, and his understanding of destiny itself. The galaxy watches silently, uncertain whether the figure of Darth Revan represents salvation, inevitability, or something far more complex and unknowable. In the quiet moments between campaigns, when the stars drift silently outside the viewport of his flagship, Revan contemplates the vastness of the galaxy, the fragility of loyalty, and the weight of choices that ripple across countless systems. The Civil War, though tactically managed, leaves scars not only on planets and fleets, but on the psyche of those who command, observe, and resist. And Revan feels the subtle tug of shadows growing stronger within him. It is not sudden, not a leap into darkness, but a slow, meditative drift, a recognition that power, when wielded with precision and insight, carries with it possibilities that Jedi teachings often deem dangerous or forbidden. The dark side whispers in the quiet, promising shortcuts, clarity, and the ability to reshape not just outcomes but the very currents of destiny, a seduction tempered only by the discipline and reflection instilled through years of Jedi training. Revan studies Sith philosophy as carefully as he once studied Jedi doctrine, seeking understanding rather than indulgence. He reads ancient texts, analyzes tactics of past Sith Lords, and meditates on the nature of power, control, and inevitability, absorbing lessons without yielding completely to the seductive pull of raw passion. Yet every campaign, every victory, and every subtle manipulation of perception reinforces the efficacy of techniques that the light side would caution against, blurring lines between morality and necessity. It is a delicate balance, one that few have navigated successfully, and Revan senses that his choices, though measured, will shape the galaxy in ways both profound and irreversible. The turning is accelerated by the persistent threat of hidden Sith conspiracies, agents operating in secret, manipulating loyalist and neutral systems alike. Force Revan to consider tactics and strategies that the Jedi would condemn, yet prove necessary for survival, stability, and ultimate victory. He begins to see that the galaxy is not simply divided between light and dark, but is a complex web of ambition, fear, loyalty, and corruption, and that mastery requires the ability to navigate and influence all currents without bias. This insight fuels the subtle shift within him, a recognition that the full potential of the Force may be accessed only by embracing rather than rejecting elements long forbidden. Revan's advisors, Mitra and Alec, notice the change though they interpret it differently. Mitra senses caution, wisdom, and lingering compassion, yet recognizes a growing willingness to apply the dark side in measured ways, a tension that raises questions about morality, necessity, and destiny. Alec, ever pragmatic, observes strategy and results, noting that the effectiveness of Revan's campaigns often relies on methods previously unthinkable within Jedi tradition, yet always executed with care, precision, and minimal unnecessary harm. Both act as stabilizing influences, preventing the drift from becoming an uncontrolled descent, ensuring that the emerging darkness serves purpose rather than indulgence. The first true test of Revan's turning occurs when a coalition of outer systems, guided by secret Sith agents, plots to assassinate key loyalist commanders and destabilize Revan's Sith operations. Revan senses the threat through both intelligence and the currents of the Force, and the measures he employs are decisive, preemptive, and by Jedi standards, ruthless. Fleets are positioned to intercept assassins before they strike. Critical communications are encrypted and rerouted, and subtle Force-influenced manipulations ensure that enemy plans collapse before they can begin. Yet the dark side's influence is apparent in the precision, subtle manipulation, and psychological pressure applied, a force that allows him to achieve results impossible through conventional Jedi methods alone. The consequences of these actions ripple through the galaxy. Allies perceive a necessary, almost inevitable decisiveness, while enemies fear not only the skill but the moral ambiguity of the revanchist leader. Whispers circulate of a commander who operates in the space between light and dark, a figure who is capable of both compassion and relentless calculation, whose presence alone shifts the balance of systems, fleets, and hearts. This perception strengthens Revan's influence even as it reinforces the subtle shadow growing within him, a shadow that demands recognition, understanding, and mastery. The philosophical journey of turning deepens as Revan studies the nature of the Force itself. He meditates on balance, on destiny, and on the interplay between passion and reason, discovering that the dichotomy of light and dark is not absolute but a spectrum, a continuum that must be understood, not feared. In this contemplation, he begins to accept that true mastery requires not the rejection of darkness, but the disciplined integration of it, the conscious choice to use it without succumbing, to harness power without corruption. Till this realization, profound and unsettling, marks a threshold, a moment in which Revan consciously embraces the tools of the dark side as instruments of purpose rather than indulgence. Alec and Mitra provide guidance, often through quiet counsel late in the night, as the galaxy drifts under starlight and silence. They challenge assumptions, question methods, and debate philosophy, ensuring that Revan's turning is deliberate, reasoned, and measured rather than impulsive or uncontrolled. Through these discussions, the framework of a new approach emerges, one that synthesizes Jedi discipline, Sith insight, and strategic vision into a coherent philosophy, capable of navigating the civil war and the complex web of galactic politics. It is a philosophy that positions Revan not simply as a conqueror or Jedi, but as a master of destiny, a figure whose understanding of the Force transcends conventional dichotomies. The turning towards darkness is further solidified through battlefield necessity. Insurgent fleets, previously underestimated, begin to act with cunning and aggression, forcing Revan to deploy strategies that leverage fear, deception, and the subtle influence of the Force in ways that the light side would traditionally forbid. He learns to apply intimidation, psychological pressure, and preemptive precision, neutralizing threats before they manifest fully, preserving loyalist forces while consolidating control and minimizing civilian casualties through careful planning. Each engagement reinforces the notion that the disciplined application of dark techniques is not mere indulgence, but a necessary instrument of survival, strategy, and ultimately peace as he defines it. The philosophical tension becomes evident, not only in strategy but in leadership. Allies begin to perceive Revan as simultaneously savior and enigma, a figure capable of both mercy and ruthless calculation, whose decisions challenge conventional morality while demonstrating unmatched competence. Enemies fear him not only for skill but for unpredictability, the sense that every movement, every command, every subtle manipulation carries consequences they cannot anticipate or fully counter. It is in this crucible that Revan's turning solidifies, the shadow within no longer a whisper but a tool, a lens through which he understands both the galaxy and his place within it. Revan reflects quietly upon the consequences of this turning. He is aware that the drift towards darkness, though disciplined and measured, changes perception, relationships, and destiny itself, creating a figure who commands not only armies but the very currents of history. Yet he also recognizes that the light remains a guiding influence, a tether, ensuring that power is applied with purpose, that morality tempers ruthlessness, and that the galaxy does not descend into indiscriminate chaos. In this delicate balance, Revan achieves a state of mastery that few have ever attained, a fusion of dark side efficacy, Jedi discernment, and strategic insight capable of reshaping the civil war and the fate of countless worlds. As fleets reposition, planets reconsider their loyalties, and spies report on enemy maneuvers, the galaxy begins to sense the emergence of a new order. one shaped not purely by light or dark, but by a leader capable of harnessing both, of anticipating, influencing, and controlling events with unprecedented clarity and precision. Revan's turning is complete not through indulgence but through understanding, not through domination but through synthesis, not through fear alone but through the inevitability of insight applied with purpose. And as the stars themselves drift in quiet, eternal motion, Revan stands at the threshold of ultimate power, the galaxy poised on the cusp of transformation, and the currents of destiny bending subtly but inexorably toward him. The galaxy, stretched across thousands of star systems, feels the steady pulse of impending transformation. As the forces loyal to Revan move with calculated precision, reshaping politics, allegiances, and the very nature of war, every fleet maneuver, every planetary engagement, every diplomatic overture is executed with the deliberate pace of a strategist who has anticipated outcomes decades before they manifest, and yet moves with the calm patience of one observing the stars drift endlessly in silence. Planets burn quietly in the distance, their surface cossacs echoing through hyperspace with a muted resonance, a reflection of the inevitable shifts in power that Revan has orchestrated across the galaxy. Yet, amidst the destruction and strategy, he ensures that the populations of key systems are preserved, not out of sentimentality, but because stability requires not only conquest, but the maintenance of life, infrastructure, and governance. The first of the final campaigns unfolds in the Mid-Rim, where several independent systems, once hesitant, have coalesced into a fragile coalition, resisting Revan's influence through both fleets and espionage. Revan approaches with measured calm, deploying reconnaissance probes and force-sensitive operatives to map not only enemy positions but morale, loyalty, and internal divisions, understanding that the mind of a commander is as critical a battlefield as the stars themselves. The coalition, unaware of the precision and foresight they face, positions their forces in traditional formations, expecting a frontal confrontation, while Revan orchestrates a multi-pronged strategy that exploits the smallest weaknesses, the slightest hesitation, and the natural rhythms of their movements. The engagement is swift yet methodical, fleets maneuvering through hyperspace corridors like chess pieces, planetary defenses guided to capitalize on enemy error, and the force flowing subtly through Revan's mind to anticipate the next tactical decision before it is even conceived. Where, at the heart of this campaign lies not only military strategy but psychological mastery. Commanders of the resisting systems begin to doubt their own instincts, misreading patterns, second-guessing reinforcements, and hesitating at moments that will prove decisive. Revan's presence, unseen yet palpably felt, shifts the currents of conflict, as though the galaxy itself bends slightly to his will. Every hyperspace lane, every planetary orbit, every communication channel subtly under the influence of a singular mind. By the campaign's end, the coalition is fractured, its fleets decimated or scattered, its political cohesion shattered, and its worlds quietly realigned under the emerging order Revan now commands. In parallel, Revan addresses the remnants of the Jedi loyalists who continue to resist across scattered sectors. Each encounter is not simply a battle of lightsabers or starships, but an intricate negotiation of morality, power, and inevitability, as Revan uses Force insight to predict intentions, exploit hesitation, and guide outcomes without unnecessary bloodshed. Even as he applies methods previously forbidden by Jedi orthodoxy, he tempers them with reflection, ensuring that victory is not achieved through cruelty but through discipline, foresight, and mastery of all elements of war. The galaxy begins to perceive this duality, a leader who is both merciless in precision and restrained in judgment, whose ascendancy feels both inevitable and intellectually absolute. A critical operation unfolds on the planet of Malachor, a site steeped in ancient destructive power. Revan recognizes its potential not only as a strategic stronghold, but as a nexus of influence, its history and residue of the Force offering both risk and unparalleled opportunity. The loyalist Jedi, desperate to prevent Revan's consolidation, mount a final attempt to seize the planet, bringing fleets, ground forces, and Force-sensitive commanders into an operation meant to turn the tide of war. Revan anticipates every movement, countering with fleets that shadow enemy trajectories, planetary defenses that exploit natural terrain and ancient structures, and subtle force manipulations that unbalance even the most disciplined adversaries. The battle itself unfolds with a tension that stretches across hours, systems, and the currents of the Force. Loyalist commanders, skilled and courageous, find their maneuvers anticipated, reinforcements arriving too late, and strategies collapsing with a precision that feels almost preordained. The ground conflict is no less calculated, as squads are drawn into positions that neutralize enemy strength while preserving essential infrastructure, the Force guiding Revan's hand to avoid unnecessary casualties even as he secures absolute control. By the campaign's end, Malachor is firmly under Revan's command, the residual echoes of ancient Sith knowledge contained and repurposed, and the loyalist Jedi left to retreat, battered, demoralized, and unable to challenge his authority further. Across the Outer Rim, similar campaigns unfold, each one reflecting Revan's meticulous integration of military, psychological, and force-based strategy. Neutral systems, observing these decisive operations, gradually align with the emerging order, recognizing not merely the effectiveness of his command, but the inevitability of his influence, as planets and fleets quietly yield without direct confrontation. Even spies and insurgent agents find themselves anticipating moves they cannot fully comprehend, manipulated not through overt power but through the perception of control, foresight, and the unspoken inevitability of Revan's vision. The Civil War, once a series of scattered conflicts and ideological divides, coalesces under the shaping hand of a leader whose mastery of strategy, force, and perception leaves little room for opposition. As the campaigns progress, Revan contemplates the philosophical implications of his victories. The Republic, fragmented and vulnerable, represents both a challenge and an opportunity, a structure to be preserved in order to maintain order, yet also a reflection of the limitations inherent in traditional leadership and morality. The Sith, hidden in shadows, offer potential power but lack the discipline and vision necessary to consolidate control without destruction. Revan recognizes that ultimate success will require synthesis, the measured integration of dark power, strategic foresight, and the stabilizing principles once championed by the Jedi. The final engagements involve a delicate interplay of diplomacy, coercion, and decisive action. Systems with political independence are courted with subtle promises of security, economic stability, and recognition, while military threats are applied not indiscriminately, but strategically, ensuring minimal conflict while maximizing influence. Loyalist remnants, sensing the futility of resistance, retreat to strongholds in distant sectors, unable to marshal sufficient forces, as Revan's reputation and tactical brilliance continue to erode morale and opposition cohesion. Even those who would challenge him in rhetoric or political negotiation find themselves subtly constrained, manipulated by perception, strategy, and the unspoken presence of a leader whose insight seems limitless. Through all of this, the shadow of war touches the galaxy gently, yet inexorably. Systems adjust governance, populations endure the quiet ripple of battles and strategic maneuvers, and the stars themselves seem to drift in contemplative silence as Revan's power consolidates. The final campaigns are not measured merely in victories or defeats, but in the shaping of destiny, in the alignment of perception, loyalty, and influence across thousands of star systems. And as the Republic itself begins to falter under the weight of its own fractured leadership, Revan stands poised, not as conqueror or destroyer alone, but as a master of war, politics, and the Force, whose ascendancy will redefine the galaxy entirely. Yet, even in this seeming inevitability, Revan senses that the ultimate challenge has not yet come. The final collapse of resistance, the confrontation with hidden Sith manipulations, and the reconciliation of light and dark within himself remain on the horizon, unresolved and yet approaching with inexorable certainty. The galaxy, in quiet, star-strewn anticipation, holds its breath, awaiting the moment when the Civil War concludes and the true consequences of Revan's mastery, vision, and philosophical evolution are revealed. And in that waiting, the currents of destiny shift subtly, silently, and irreversibly toward a future shaped by one who has walked the path between light and dark with unparalleled skill and discipline. The galaxy, finally settling into a fragile calm after the sweeping campaigns of conquest, breathes a quiet, uneasy sigh. Yet within the corridors of power, unseen currents continue to stir, guiding destiny in ways that are subtle, deliberate, and profound. 7. Revan, though victorious and masterful in every measurable way, stands at the precipice of a transformation even greater than any battle he has waged, a moment where memory, identity, and the essence of the self are poised to be rewritten. The Jedi Council, wary of the shadow growing in the heart of one who has walked so seamlessly between light and dark, convenes in secret, deliberating not upon victory or loss, but upon the necessity of intervention to preserve the Republic and prevent the corruption that might follow unchecked power. It is in these quiet deliberations, far from the roar of fleets and the clamor of war, that a decision is reached. Revan must be stripped of memory, of past deeds, and of the intricate wisdom forged from both light and dark, so that he may walk again a path unburdened by shadows too powerful for even the most disciplined Jedi to temper. The procedure is slow, precise, and heavy with moral weight, a combination of ancient Jedi techniques and Force-guided insight designed to preserve life, potential, and purpose even while erasing the very essence of experience that defined him. Revan, lying in meditative suspension, feels the currents of the Force shift around him, subtle at first, then with increasing pressure as memory, identity, and the intertwined threads of light and dark are gently unraveled and laid aside like a tapestry prepared for renewal. It is neither painless nor violent. The body remains calm, the mind shielded by layers of meditation, yet within the whisper of loss is profound, a void where clarity, wisdom, and recollection once resided, replaced with the faint, clean slate of unformed potential. Allies and enemies alike recognize the gravity of this act, for it is not destruction nor conquest, but the deliberate erasure of experience, a severing of one life's journey so that it might begin anew in the balance of the Force. The galaxy continues around him as the procedure unfolds, unaware of the quiet storm that alters one of its greatest figures. Planets that once quivered under the shadow of war now shift toward tentative stability. Fleets are repositioned into peacetime roles, and the echoes of Revan's campaign settle into legend, carried by historians, veterans, and survivors alike. Yet even in silence, the currents of destiny feel different, as if the absence of one mind once so dominant and insightful leaves a subtle imbalance, a space for unforeseen consequences, opportunities, and challenges to emerge in the years to come. The memory wipe is complete, and Revan awakens, not as a conqueror, a strategist, or a master of the Force, but as a figure unformed, a blank canvas with only instinct, potential, and a faint residue of the Force guiding his newly unshaped path. He is given a new identity, a name, and a place among the Jedi, who once fought beside him. Yet these figures perceive only a distant familiarity, a presence that is potent yet unmoored, a hint of the legend that once walked among the stars. Bertrand Alex, standing near and observing, feel both relief and sorrow, relief that he is preserved, sorrow that the brilliance, insight, and ethical complexity that defined him are now hidden behind layers of oblivion. They guide him gently into training, into missions that test character, intuition, and skill, all the while aware that beneath the unformed mind lies the latent potential of a figure who could, one day, reclaim what was once lost, for good or for ill. The galaxy perceives him as a young Jedi, humble, skilled, and promising, unaware of the deep currents of destiny flowing invisibly beneath his unknowing gaze. The journey of rediscovery begins subtly, in moments of instinct rather than conscious memory. A strategic decision during a patrol seems to align with patterns of thought that are not his own, yet executed flawlessly, leaving allies impressed and mystified. During meditation, the Force responds to him in ways that hint at profound understanding, a resonance that cannot be fully explained, a ghost of insight lingering in the unformed mind, a shadow of mastery waiting for awakening. Encounters with enemy forces, political leaders, and Force-sensitive beings provoke subtle realizations, flashes of intuition, and decisions that echo the brilliance of the past, as if the Force itself whispers fragments of memory back into consciousness. The rediscovery is neither linear nor immediate. It is slow, almost imperceptible, a process that unfolds across planets, conflicts, and years of training. Every victory, every encounter, and every reflection acts as a brushstroke, painting the contours of skill, strategy, and philosophical depth that once defined him. The mind, though blanked of its history, remembers instinctively the patterns of combat, the flow of the Force, and the subtleties of leadership, creating a foundation upon which memory and identity can one day be rebuilt. Allies notice the uncanny effectiveness, the brilliance that seems natural yet impossible, and begin to sense, without understanding, that the young Jedi before them is not entirely unshaped by experience, but carries the echo of a mind once extraordinary. Even the Force seems to respond differently, guiding him, testing him, and revealing the contours of past mastery, without revealing the details. In moments of crisis, he finds solutions that would have required decades of experience, his intuition cutting through uncertainty as if the Force itself nudges him toward paths once familiar. Yet, memory remains absent, a gap both protective and agonizing in its ambiguity, leaving Revan to rebuild his understanding of self, morality, and the delicate interplay of light and dark without guidance from the past. It is a quiet crucible, a slow and deliberate shaping of destiny, where each decision, reflection, and subtle insight begins to reconstruct the legend while preserving the potential for choice, balance, and moral clarity. The rediscovery accelerates during conflicts in the Mid-Rim, where remnants of former adversaries and emerging threats test the young Jedi in ways that mirror the battles of the past. He exhibits remarkable strategic insight, improvisational skill, and Force sensitivity that confounds both allies and enemies, hinting at the dormant genius within, a presence waiting to reclaim its full form. Allies are inspired by his skill, loyalty, and courage, unaware that the echoes of conquest, duality, and philosophical depth underpin every decision, guiding him toward both survival and the eventual reclamation of identity. Enemies, too, sense the anomaly, finding themselves outmaneuvered, anticipating moves that appear impossible, and experiencing the subtle weight of a figure whose history is hidden but whose presence is undeniable. Gradually, fragments of memory resurface, often unexpectedly triggered by places, people, and Force currents that evoke deep, instinctual recognition. A whispered name, a battlefield echo, or a subtle pattern of strategy sparks clarity. Each fragment a thread pulling him closer to understanding the truth of who he was, what he has done, and what he might become once more. The process is painstaking, immersive, and transformative, allowing Revan to reclaim skill, wisdom, and ethical insight without the burden of complete memory, creating a balance between past mastery and present moral choice. The galaxy watches silently, unaware that one of its greatest figures is slowly returning to form, poised to confront destiny with knowledge, restraint, and the duality of power, fully integrated into a conscious self. And in this slow, meditative journey, the stage is set for the final awakening, the reconciliation of light and dark, and the reclamation of identity that will forever reshape the galaxy's understanding of destiny, power, and the Force itself. The galaxy, calm yet restless after decades of conflict, feels a subtle tension in the currents of the Force, as though the stars themselves are aware that a moment of profound reckoning approaches, a culmination of events, decisions, and choices that stretch back through years of war, conquest, and rediscovery. Revan, now fully restored in memory and mastery, stands at the crossroads of destiny, holding within himself both the wisdom of the Jedi, the insight of the Sith, and the accumulated knowledge of countless campaigns that have shaped systems, fleets, and minds across the stars. He surveys the galaxy not with ambition, nor with vengeance, but with the calm awareness of one who knows the fragility of power, the weight of responsibility, and the inexorable consequences of choice. Allies and former rivals alike feel the subtle shift in his presence, sensing that the figure before them is no longer simply a hero or a conqueror, but a living nexus of philosophy, morality, and Force-guided insight, capable of shaping the very trajectory of history. The final challenge manifests not as a battle of fleets or duel of lightsabers, but as a convergence of ideological and philosophical forces. The Jedi Council, observing the consequences of the Civil War, seeks to ensure the stability of the Republic, even as remnants of the Sith, hidden in shadows, aim to reclaim influence and perpetuate cycles of darkness that have long defined galactic conflict. Revan is acutely aware of both sides, understanding that the galaxy cannot be preserved through simple allegiance to light or domination by dark, but through a careful synthesis of insight, restraint, and decisive action that honors the complexities of life, loyalty, and the Force itself. It is in this crucible that Revan must make the final choice, not between victory and defeat, but between the path of absolute control, absolute submission, or the measured integration of light and dark in service of a higher balance. In service of a higher balance. In preparation, he reflects upon the journey that brought him here, the rise and fall of empires, the subtle orchestration of loyalty and rebellion, the careful application of Force insight, and the long, meditative exploration of morality that defined his turning. Recalls the campaigns across Taris, Malachor V, and the Outer Rim, the subtle psychological strategies that won entire fleets without wholesale destruction, and the philosophical awakenings that allowed him to master both dark and light without succumbing entirely to either. The memory wipe and subsequent rediscovery shaped him further, providing clarity tempered with instinct, skill informed by experience, and wisdom refined through the delicate balance of rediscovered identity. In this quiet reflection, Revan perceives that the galaxy itself demands not domination, but understanding, not blind adherence, but guidance, and that his final choice must honor both the past and the possibilities of the future. The climactic moment unfolds in the political heart of the Republic, where leaders, ambassadors, and Jedi representatives gather to determine the fate of countless systems. Revan steps forward, not with the arrogance of conquest, nor the fury of vengeance, but with the serene authority of one who understands the currents of destiny and the subtle influence of the Force on every mind, every choice, and every star. He speaks, his voice calm, deliberate, and resonant, conveying insight that transcends words, guiding decision-makers not through coercion, but through clarity of thought, moral perspective, and a vision of stability that encompasses all sectors, races, and philosophies. The outcome is a restructuring of governance, a redefinition of loyalty, and a careful application of power that preserves the Republic, limits the influence of Sith agents, and ensures that future generations will inherit systems guided by principle rather than fear. Yet the choice extends beyond politics and fleets. It is profoundly personal. Revan must reconcile the duality within himself, the power of the dark side he once embraced, and the disciplined compassion of the light, each demanding recognition, mastery, and integration into a conscious whole. In quiet meditation, he allows the currents of the Force to flow freely, confronting visions of conquest, temptation, and absolute authority, weighing them against the principles he now understands as essential for the galaxy's long-term survival. He chooses neither dominance nor denial, but synthesis, the deliberate and disciplined integration of both sides of the Force, wielded with wisdom, foresight, and restraint, a choice that ensures his legacy will be one of guidance, balance, and enduring influence. The galaxy, sensing this resolution, experiences a subtle, pervasive calm. Fleets reposition under peaceful directives, planetary governments stabilize, and the remnants of conflict fade quietly into history, leaving stories, legends, and philosophical foundations that will guide generations of Force-sensitive beings, politicians, and scholars. Revan's allies, including Mitra and Alec, witness the full emergence of mastery, a reconciliation of power and morality that transcends individual ambition and reflects the ultimate potential of sentient insight harmonized with the Force. Enemies, too, perceive that opposition is no longer a contest of fleets or battle, but of understanding, influence, and inevitability, prompting both respect and cautious submission to the new equilibrium. The final chapters of Revan's life are marked by quiet guidance, rather than grand conquest. He mentors young Jedi, advising on the integration of light and dark, the responsibilities of power, and the subtle art of strategy in both political and martial spheres, ensuring that his experience, though hard-won, is transmitted with purpose, clarity, and ethical grounding. He oversees the stabilization of systems formerly ravaged by war, using insight, negotiation, and occasional subtle force influence to prevent the resurgence of chaos and ensure the Republic remains capable of surviving future challenges. The legend of Darth Revan becomes layered, a warrior, a strategist, a philosopher, and a master of the Force, whose life demonstrates that true mastery requires not domination nor submission, but the integration of all facets of self with unwavering clarity and deliberate purpose. Even as centuries will pass and the story of Revan drifts into myth, the impact of his choices reverberates through history. Political structures, Jedi philosophy, and the understanding of the Force itself are forever influenced by the balance he achieved, the reconciliation of power and morality, and the disciplined integration of light and dark. Legends speak of his campaigns, his turning, the memory wipe, and his rediscovery not merely as events of historical interest, but as moral and philosophical lessons, a template for navigating complexity, temptation, and the inexorable weight of choice. And as the galaxy drifts through the silent eternal motion of stars and systems, the name of Revan remains a subtle current in the Force, a reminder of the profound potential of mastery, balance, and the disciplined integration of destiny, wisdom, and power. In the quiet moments, when a young Jedi meditates under starlight, or a scholar contemplates the lessons of history, the essence of Revan whispers softly through the Force. Not as a conqueror, not as a Sith, not as a mere legend, but as a master who walked the delicate line between light and dark, who embraced the complexity of morality, and whose choices ensured that the galaxy could endure, learn, and grow. His final legacy is neither power nor fame, but the subtle shaping of destiny itself, the enduring understanding that mastery requires balance, insight, and the courage to make choices that transcend fear, desire, and fleeting ambition. And in that understanding, the story of Darth Revan concludes, not with an end, but with the quiet, eternal resonance of a life lived in pursuit of truth, mastery, and the deliberate harmony of light and dark across the endless stars.